I went on a hiking trip in Utah many years ago with my old roommate and our 2 girlfriends. One day, we were going to do some backcountry camping, so we park in one of the lots and prepare to head out along the trail. It was early morning, and the parking lot was mostly empty, except for this one man who was lingering near our car. We get ready and set out on the trail, and he starts following us. He appeared to be in his 50s, small stature, wearing flat canvas beach shoes and a red hat, and carried no gear at all. The first part of the hike was all downhill, so we descended into the valley, and we started to get concerned after we hit the first mile marker, and he was still about 20 feet behind us. It was extremely hot, and he had no water, and definitely was not wearing the proper shoes for the terrain. We weren't concerned for our safety, but did start to have concerns about his, especially as we continued further and further along the path. My friend finally goes back and introduces himself and tells him that it's a rough hike, and without water he should probably consider heading back. He says he just wants to walk a bit further. So we carry on, and the stranger continues to hang back. After the 2-mile marker, my friend heads back again, lets him know our concern, and suggests he goes back. The return is going to be mostly uphill, and it's starting to heat up even more. The man says he just wants to follow for a bit longer, and really, there is nothing we can do at this point. We eventually come to an area around the 3-mile marker, where things level out, and my friend goes to talk to him again. He tells my friend that he's been in a coma for years, and just came out of it recently. He said the last thing he remembered was Ronald Reagan as president, and then waking up to the attacks on 9/11. He said that his sister told him that his coma was God's punishment for all of the evil things he had done. My friend asked, "What things?" And he said, "Very bad things." We cancelled the backcountry camping that night in the area and hiked back out. I worked as a pizza deliverer for a local pizza joint in my town when I was 17 to 18. The popular demographic was the people in poorer households, so a lot of my deliveries consisted of travelling to the grittier parts of town. On one such delivery, I was headed to an apartment complex. It was incredibly run down, with marks and spray paint on the sides. Upon buzzing in, I was greeted by a pungent cigarette smell throughout the entire building. The delivery is on the 3rd floor, and I take the elevator up because I don't want to disturb the pizzas. The door for the apartment the customer was in was cracked slightly open, as most are. Customers are usually eager to see me, walking down the hall, and get the payment over with quickly. I lightly tap on the door and knock, and it swings open, and I'm greeted by an older man. Now, nothing seemed too strange about him. He was wearing a palm t-shirt with cargo shorts and looked fairly ordinary. The apartment, however, was very messy. The kitchen was a mess, and there were random magazines thrown about, and a CRT TV laying on the living room floor, with a single lawn chair and an ashtray. He greeted me in, which is where I should have thought a little more ahead. Normally, there isn't really any reason to go inside a customer's home, unless it is a very big order or quite cold outside, and neither of these things were the case. I walked into the apartment and walked into the kitchen. Bad idea. The kitchen was a dead end. It was narrow and hard to walk past someone. It was 2 long countertops, with one on the wall and one parallel to about 2 to 3 feet, and ceiling cupboards to create basically a wall between the kitchen and the living room. I set the pizzas on the counter, and I turned around to have the man creepily close to me. He had his arms on each of the counters, basically closing me in, and staring at me. I handed him the debit machine, and he paid very slowly while looking at me with this creepy glare. He handed it back to me, and he put his hand back on the counter. I said, "Thank you," and motioned that I wanted to get past him, but he didn't move. He said, "Why don't you have a slice with me, young man?" I was quickly ushered. No thank you, I have to get going." But he still didn't move. I was getting really creeped out at this point, so I moved my body into his arm that was blocking the way, as he clearly resisted, and I pushed harder, and he quickly moved the door. As I was making my way to the door, another door in the apartment of the old man's swung open with a lot of force. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, and I started to walk faster. I heard stomping, and that's when I decided to book it down the hallway and basically jumped down the flights of stairs because I didn't trust the elevator to move me fast enough. I ran to my car and peeled out of there as fast as I could. I imagine I could have been robbed, or worse, if I had not left that situation any sooner. I'm an 18-year-old female, and unfortunately have a history of encounters with creepers. This story stood out the most since it happened at one of the places I used to escape such things. I was at a local anime convention about 8 years ago. Yes, I'm a shameful weeb, and then it was worse. I was cosplaying a character from the popular comic book Homestruck, the alien character who was symbolized by the zodiac sign of Cancer, named Carcat. It was one of my first times actually buying things and preparing for a cosplay, and I'll admit it looked a right mess. People liked my expressiveness in pictures though, so I got to take a few. Pictures were half the fun of cosplaying. Anyway, another part was befriending some of the local con attendees and getting to know them. These can create some pretty lasting bonds. I even dated someone I met at a con, but as these stories always go, these people aren't in today's focus. Enter Alucard. This very tall guy had a very good Alucard cosplay. It seemed like he sunk a lot of time and effort into it. The only thing missing was the hat and goggles, but me being the nerd that I am thought he was just playing as Alucard when he was awakened for the second time. I asked to take a picture and he obliged. Eventually we started chatting, and in retrospect I should have analysed the conversation more carefully. The character Alucard is a vampire, and the alien characters in Homestruck have a variety of blood colours. I was playing around with my friends since middle school who accompanied me to cosplaying another alien called Terezi, and we joked around the blood colours and stuff. Alucard suddenly decided to butt in with this charming phrase, "I've never tasted alien blood before. Want to give me your neck?" We decided to believe he was just playing and played along in character. Thankfully, in character met my best friend who was very low-key protective of keeping my character's blood colour a secret between the two of us. However, consider this strike one against Alucard over here. Then the conversation switched back out of character again, and we talked about life outside of cosplay. This guy allegedly was in the military, and was actually ostracized by his peers. At the time I couldn't imagine why, aside from the obvious. However, the fact he was in the military told me he was at least 18, way too old to flirt with someone 4 years his junior. The more we spoke, however, the more he wanted to see me out of the cosplay. He even asked me to take off my wig. My hair at the time was long, curly, easily matted and hard to get in a wig, so I declined. He kept pressing to see it though, so I pulled up a picture on my phone, and I wish I'd paid more attention to his response to that. As well, most people would call me cute or something like that, but he immediately said I looked sexy. Wasn't a risque picture or anything, just a very boring looking selfie of me wearing a bright red lipstick. The day went on and I was getting more and more uncomfortable as we let him accompany our group, which expanded when my other friends from middle school joined in. She was a petite and the only one of us who was actually Asian, Vietnamese, and Alucard low-key creeped on her as well. Fortunately, my always present maternal instincts for her kicked in, to keep her from his grasp. I wasn't so lucky. During the opening ceremonies for the convention, he began flirting with me, even though I told him I had a boyfriend at the time, which wasn't a total lie. I did have a boyfriend, but it was a long-distance relationship across the pond. This, of course, didn't deter Alucard, though midway through the ceremony he clamped his hand down on my crotch quite hard, causing my body to seize up in shock in response. My body hadn't elicited anything like that. He only chuckled a whisper in my ear, "If you want the screw of your life, just say yes." I didn't know what to do. I only remembered Terezi saying something like, "Don't touch her," before I blacked out. Turns out my longtime friends went into badass mode and we escaped the packed auditorium safely. We congregated in the girls' room and they calmed me down. And when we all met at Terezi's house later, we discussed the best course of action. The next day, my mother accompanied us. And she tracked this guy down. Her awesome mode seemed to activate, as this 5'3" woman grabbed someone easily 6'2" by the collar down to meet her eye line and growled, "I'll kill you." When I told my boyfriend about this, he did some research, and the guy was actually in his 30s, as well as autistic. The latter made me feel as though it were my fault, but my boyfriend reassured me this guy was still a soldier and still was supposed to have honor and morals, regardless of a mental disorder or illness. Besides, I'm also autistic, and would have never have done anything as messed up as that to anyone, younger or older than me. If you're hearing this now, thanks for ruining my favorite anti-hero protagonist for me. You barstool. This happened to me about 2 years ago, when I was 17. My family went out for the day to go shopping for food, and I stayed home alone. I was in my room playing games on my PC, with my headphones on, and I always kept my door closed. After about an hour, I get up to use the bathroom. Both the bathroom and my room are on the second floor, and our house at the time was a 2-story detached house in West Belfast, Northern Ireland. So when I get back to my room, I remember closing the door and continuing to play games. About 30 minutes later, I go to check my phone, but realize I left it in the bathroom. I get up to go and get it, and notice my door is slightly ajar now. Please understand that my house isn't drafty, and I know the door is good, and does not open due to wind or whatever it was. So, this catches me off guard. But I reckon that I probably just didn't close it all the way, and head out to get my phone. I come back and continue to play, making sure I closed the door on my way back in. Sometime later, I heard my family come back home. I hear them bringing the first load of shopping into the kitchen, and go out to the car to get more. When they come back, they call my name and I head downstairs. When I came down, I saw that the back patio door was lying wind open. They asked if I had been out back at any point, and I told them that I hadn't been. We looked outside and saw that one of the deck chairs was pulled over to a lower part of the fence, facing a small area of woodland leading into another street, obviously not where it should be. This shocked me. My mind raced with an idea of what the hell was going on. This is my own personal theory. Somebody had managed to get in, most likely through the back door, and they went to check out to see if the coast was clear. They went upstairs, opened my room, and saw me. They must have decided to wait downstairs for some reason, perhaps thinking that I would leave, or that they could ambush me, but had gotten afraid when they heard my family returning. using the fact they had left the kitchen to go bring in more shopping, to slip out as fast as they could, and had used the chair to get over the fence. Even with this idea, I don't understand why they would risk coming in, given that it was in the middle of the day. Plus, if they had seen I had headphones on, why not just come up behind me? The worst thing about it is that I have no concrete proof of what happened that day. I have no idea why someone came in, how they got in, who they were, or anything. But one thing is certain. Someone did come into my house that day. There's more to this story though. A week or so later, at around 2 AM, I'm in my room playing games. While playing, I ended up drifting off to sleep. Then, all of a sudden, I am awoken by my mum coming in and shaking me, asking me if I was outside. I told her no, that I've been here all night and was asleep. She explained to me that while she was laying in bed, she heard the back door slam, and as her room was just above the kitchen and back door, she felt the shake of the slam. My stepdad was working night shift at the time, so it was only me, my mum and sister in the house. I go downstairs to check, to see if everything's okay. The door is wide open. Our back garden was in pitch black darkness, so not knowing if anyone was out there, I close and lock the door, and looked around the garden from the inside with a torch. I don't see anyone outside, and decide to stay downstairs for a few hours, keeping a lookout. The next day, we changed the locks. The strange thing is, about both these instances, nothing was stolen. None of our things were missing, and it seemed that nothing had really been moved or any drawers looked through. I have absolutely no explanation for this, and to this day, it baffles me. We have discussed getting the police involved, but we feel that because there was no serious evidence of a crime taking place, and that we would be moving out in a matter of weeks, we thought there wouldn't really be anything they could do to help. So we just changed the locks and made absolutely sure to keep everything on lockdown until we left. This was on a worksite visit. We were wearing boots and walking through the countryside. I was with a few people looking at a river and some of the structures in rural Dorset, UK. All of a sudden, my boss goes, "There's a panther." We all turn to look, and there is indeed what appears to be a panther walking across a field maybe 100 meters away. Now before this is derided, it was definitely a feline. You could tell by the shape it walked. It was large, much larger than a house cat. Naturally, after observing this, we went to the pub and discussed it with the locals. Common sight, apparently. Unfortunately, I was the only one with the camera, and it was the worst one going. After the pub, we went back to look around and found its footprints. They were close to the size of my palm and quite widely spread. I've subsequently seen a panther at close range at a wildlife park, and it made me even more certain of what I saw. The creepy bit was when it saw us, stopped, and was just watching us, watching it. I'm 18 years old. I met this boy called Trent. Trent and I met through a mutual friendship, a group of friends that I was very close with for many years. We started hanging out, and as a group, smoke and sesh out with friends. He was the loveliest boy, with such kind eyes and the most adorable smile. I was truly infatuated. Trent had a past before I knew him, troubles with past girlfriends, and a bit known for a bad temper. But I ignored the warnings from multiple people, and even an ex of his, assuming the classic lie, "He'll never hurt me though." We started dating on March 21st, 2018. He asked me out one night when we had taken a lot of Xanax for fun with his friends, and was expressing to me and his friends within 2 months of knowing him how he was completely head over heels for me. That made me fall deeper and deeper. Everything was so exciting and new, and he gave me butterflies. Side note to this, I had been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and bipolar disorder, which just adds to the fun of my life. All was good until about 4 months of being together. I was at home one night, planning to push through it and go out for some drinks with him and some friends, but changed my mind, as I physically could not leave my bed. That night he disappeared. His phone was off for hours and made me worried sick. In the morning, I wake up to a message saying his phone had gotten broken when he was pushed into the pool and he had to leave it to sit in rice overnight. He came over to my house that day and took care of me while I was sick. 2 months go by, and I found out 3 days before my birthday that on that exact night he had cheated on me after he enticed his ex-girlfriend to go over to his house, saying that he was going to take his own life because we had a fight and I wouldn't speak to him anymore. They had sex that night, and when I found out, it broke me. My heart ached and raced, pounded in my chest, and I left his house in tears. With him chasing me up the street, I hid in a driveway and turned off my tracking location, Find My Friends, that he set up on my phone, and caught the first bus that I saw after hiding and watching him pace around the streets, shirtless and shoeless, in search of me. An hour later, I decided to answer his call and tell him to leave me alone. It was then that he screamed and cried and begged, but I didn't give in and ended the call. 2 minutes later, he called me, saying he needed to go to the hospital as he shattered his hand while punching a hole in a glass mirror behind his door. After a few weeks of my heart longing for him and him begging for me, I felt like he must have really loved me to do all of this. The stupidest mistake I've ever made. His behavior continued throughout our 6-month relationship. If I didn't answer a phone call, I'd receive 10 within 5 minutes, and 10 messages of how I was a dog and a bitch, even if I had left my phone in my room for 20 minutes while we had dinner. He demanded to see me all the time and begged to be by my side every minute. I saw all of this as an expression of his love of me. Our relationship was spent mostly smoking weed, daily, and I mean all day. If he wasn't stoned, all hell would break loose until he could get high again. I spent hundreds of dollars buying marijuana to keep him feeling better when we'd argue in the car or he'd be in a bad mood. He made threats to me and my friends in the past about killing all of the dogs. My friends did not see it the way I did, and eventually we had falling outs, and he assured me that they weren't my real friends. He was the only real person I had in my life who truly cared and loved me, and I believed that. My confidence diminished, my happiness was released in the smallest doses, and I began to stop recognizing the girl who I was and couldn't remember how it felt to feel really genuinely happy. Only when he was in a good mood and wanted to be intimate and cuddly. That was when I felt good. On our 6 months, we had a lovely dinner in the city at a super expensive restaurant. After our meal and a few drinks, he told me to go wait around the corner for him to pay while I called a cab. I found out when he walked out that he had not paid, and we made a run for it. Later that night, we went to visit our 2 best friends, who were also a couple, and were our smoking squad, as we liked to call ourselves. We decided to go for a little drive. My sober friend, fortunately, was driving around the corner, and smoke a little before going home to bed. It was while we were chopping up that me and my girl Bella were whispering in the back. Trent couldn't quite understand what we were talking about and demanded to know what we were saying. As a joke, Bella sarcastically replied that I was talking about another boy. This is when he ran around to her side of the car, and as he did this, I pulled the lock on her door and he punched a hole straight through her window, leaving shattered glass flying all over him. The police came for a noise complaint, and after coming up with an excuse, I was left to walk my boyfriend home while he was sobbing and apologizing. Eventually, we were escorted home in the police car. We broke up that weekend after encounters of him smashing his head into a wall, swiping a photo frame off the table, and slicing his hand, punching a hole in my brother's Kia windscreen, and grabbed my shirt while I was driving. I had officially been scared and saw for the first time that he might really be dangerous. I told him I could not be with him after the damage to my brother's car. My family would never look at him the same and would ban me from seeing him. The very next morning, he made me pick him up at 8 a.m. and he took the car to get the window fixed so I wouldn't leave him. In short words, I didn't forgive him. A week later, a week of hundreds of missed calls, thousands of messages, of every social media platform possible, he began sending me photos of bottles of Xanax that he was buying, telling me he was going to eat them all and that it would be my fault. My heart dropped, and I answered his call and begged him not to be so silly. I told him I would go and see him that afternoon to make sure he was okay, but not to get back together. He seemed content with this and hung up the phone. That day, I was with a few girlfriends at a pool party, with some of my old friends that he didn't particularly like. After being there for maybe an hour or so, I bet you can guess who just lets themselves in and walks straight inside, demanding to everyone that I leave right now. I refused. I was petrified. His eyes, I knew that look. The way his green eyes turned almost black when he was in a rage. I continued to refuse and told him I would come outside and talk to him if he let me bring out one of the boys to make sure I was okay. He did not take that one bit and decided to leave, which was a relief for me. But less than 20 seconds later, we hear smashing in the side street. The whole house ran out to investigate and watched as Trent ran back to his car and sped off after ripping off the windscreen wipers of another one of my best friend's car and shattering each window. At this point, we were all so worried and angry and confused, so we decided that we should drop the damaged car to my house so it was off the streets and somewhere safe. However, my car was parked a few streets over, and I got into the car and began driving when I was rammed into an intersection. My car was spinning, and I quickly gained control only to realize he was chasing behind me in his own car. We zoomed through the traffic, through red lights, intersections, and squeezing through almost impossible car spaces in a movie-like pursuit. I almost hit 3 pedestrians, and God knows how many cars. He chased me down the streets, continuously ramming me, then slowing down and speeding up just to ram me again. Glancing back in my rearview mirror, I saw him laughing and taunting me. Those eyes I'll never forget. Immediately when I noticed him chasing me, I called 000, which is Australia's 911, and tried frantically explaining to the operator where I was and what was happening, while being rammed and trying to dodge cars, people, sidewalks, poles, and street signs. I thought I'd throw him off and turn into a car park, but he was there too. Quickly, he sped in front of my car, locking me in while he blocked the exit with his car. The door opened as he stepped outside, throwing himself at the window and trying to rip open the door. I screamed into the phone and begged for help, but they just could not seem to find me. Eventually, I decided that the windows were going to give out soon and I needed to get away. So I drove up the gutter, ripping off half of the front bonnet of the car, and sped all the way back up the street. I thought I got away when I saw he was struggling to get back in his car, but that relief shattered when I saw his white car right behind me again, ramming and stopping while he laughed. I drove up through 3 suburbs and drove straight to my dad's house. I honked the horn like a crazy person, but his car was quick to catch up, and I could not bear the thought of putting anyone in my family at risk of this maniac. So I kept going, hoping that he wasn't quick enough to swipe my car off the cliff edge that runs along my street. I continued driving over the top of all the roundabouts, but I didn't care. My mother lived around the corner from my dad's, and I started to head there. But as I reached the street, I remembered my 5-year-old sister and my mum and couldn't dare put them at risk, so I kept driving. Around corners, swiping into cars and trying to find every main road possible, begging for help to the operator, for them to just find me. I continued to fly down streets at 120 kilometers per hour. I'm an 18-year-old girl. I've never driven so fast or chaotically. After about 10 minutes of what seemed like an hour, I reached yet another main road and repeated my location to the operator, all the while being rammed and tormented. He sped up in the lane next to me, in the opposite side of the road, and swerved his car in front of mine, in an attempt to lock me in so he could try again to rip me from the car. My immediate reaction was the reverse. I put the car in reverse and put the accelerator flat to the floor. It only took a few seconds for him to get back in his car and begin driving at me. Head on, the only thing I could do was drive towards him. This is the part where everything went in slow motion. I saw him coming at me. We were driving at each other at about 40 kilometers per hour, and my only options were to either crash into a parked car next to me, crash head-on into Trent, or crash into a telegraph pole on the other side of the road. The only thing running through my mind was which way would be the quickest and least painful way to die. So I chose the pole and took a hard right turn as I missed the front of it by being saved by the gutter, saving my life by mere inches. This really made him mad, and he turned the car back around and T-boned the driver's side door, pinning me into it. He got out and yet again punched and kicked and slammed all the windows. Now let me tell you, this boy is at least 100 kilograms. He's a big boy, and 6 foot tall. He was massive. I stood no chance. I began to hop from seat to seat, trying to stay away from him, from whichever window he broke first. The whole chase lasted 17 minutes. This is where the sirens began to ring, and I broke down and cried, as he ran back into his car and took off up the street. He jumped 5 fences before they managed to tackle him. He spent a week in a holding cell and was released on bail. My heart ached. My head spun. My mental illness had reached an all-time low, and without him I was ready to die. The situation made me want to die. But for some strange reason I still loved him. It made me sick, but I loved him. He was handed a restraining order, but that didn't stop him. The day of his release, he began apologizing, begging, crying, saying he had no memory and he was so sorry and that he'd never do it again. This is the part where you're all going to hate me. I wanted to take him back. I told him I still loved him, and I still spoke to him daily. He told me he wouldn't have done those things if I didn't make him so angry, and I apologized sincerely. But the jealousy and protectiveness continued. More threats. You shouldn't have called the cops and just let me kill you. I'm gonna kill everyone close to you. I hope you die tomorrow. I'll laugh. The things he said are like that, and the list goes on. It took me 2 more months to wake up and realize what the hell was I doing. After he had bashed a boy that I had kissed and started doing drive-bys at places that I'd hang out, just staring at me. The saddest part is, when I asked him if he had broken the windows and actually gotten into the car that day he chased me down, what he would have actually done to me. His reply, I honestly don't know. So girls, boys, if you ever feel mistreated, speak up. If you notice red flags, don't ignore them. A leopard never changes his spots. And if I had have stayed with him, I wouldn't be here today to tell you the horror story that was my first relationship. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I hope it wasn't trigger warning worthy to anyone. You're all beautiful and deserve nothing but happiness. Don't settle for less, because then you miss out on more. This happened back when I was 17, living in a small rural village. I had been at a friend's all evening, watching films and chilling, and I left to go home at around 11. It was quite a long walk back to mine, as she lived on the outskirts of the village down some back roads. I felt relatively safe, as when it got to a certain time of night, it was quiet. You wouldn't bump into anyone, and there were hardly any cars on the road, especially at that late hour. It was weirdly peaceful. Where I lived was a large avenue with 2 blocks of houses, like 2 big circles that you would get to after following a small dark road that consisted of a few large old houses and vicarages. As I'm passing the vicarage, I see this little beat-up red Nissan Micra coming towards me. The closer it got, the more it slowed down, and the guy is breaking his neck trying to look at me. I mean, there was nothing subtle about it. It came nearly to a full stop as it drew alongside me, and I began to panic. There was not another soul about, except me and this strange guy. I was determined not to get myself into a tiz, so I picked up the pace and refused to look at him. As far as I knew, he drove off. I continued walking home, which was a literal 5-minute straight line from there, and I kept listening out for a car engine and was vigilant of any headlights creeping up behind me. I heard nothing and saw nothing, so I breathed a sigh of relief as I could now see my house. I walked in and locked the door and saw my mum stood there in the living room chatting on the phone. I'm trying to interrupt her conversation, telling her about the weird guy in the red car. when for some reason she goes to the front window and peeks through the curtains, and she takes the phone from her ear and says, "What's that car?" This is all in a minute, since walking through the door, and I'm thinking to myself, it can't be him, because if he had just followed me, I'd have heard the car. Before I even get a chance to look for myself, there's a knock at the front door, so I go and answer it, only pulling it up a few inches, and there's this guy stood there, empty-handed, wearing a baseball cap. It was the same guy from the car, and I'm just like, "What the hell? Can I help you?" "Did you order pizza?" he asks me. No, you have the wrong house." He takes a step forward. "Did you order pizza?" "No, I didn't order pizza." Before I reply, my mum has come up behind the open door and says, "Is there a problem?" This causes him to back off, mumbling, "I must have the wrong address," before he gets into his car and takes off. Sure to say that we were both a bit spooked, and made sure everywhere was locked up properly. So to the stealthy alleged pizza guy who stalked me home, let's not meet. I used to work as night security in a convention center. This had all manner of conventions in it, all the time, all year round. And I would often work nights. It was my job to walk around the stands and make sure that no one was there when they weren't supposed to be. There'd be times when vendors would get there early in the morning or would stay late at night, setting up or prepping for something, and we were totally cool with that. We were flexible. But there was one time when I was walking around, it must have been around 3 a.m, doing my round and feeling not so great, when I hear something in the background. It sounds like movement. So I spin my flashlight around to see what the hell's going on. I'm quite groggy, and I see something dart past my line of sight. I call out to them and tell them to stop, and ask to see some form of identification. There's no one there. I then hear footsteps leading up to the ladies' toilet, and see the door close, ever so slightly, with my flashlight. I know someone's in the building, but there's no reason to be afraid of me. I just want to know what they're doing, and I need ID. It's 3 in the morning after all. So I open the door to the ladies, turn the light on and look around with my flashlight. There's no one in any of the stalls. I push all the doors open, and it's empty. Then I get a chill run up my spine. I flash my light towards the ceiling, expecting to see some ghostly abomination, but there's nothing there. I go to leave, and I feel very scared. What the hell's going on? I know what I saw, or am I just imagining things in my exhaustion? I chalk it up to tiredness, go grab a coffee, and wait until I'm relieved that morning. Just as I'm heading out, I speak to one of my colleagues and say that I had a pretty weird night and that I think I need sleep. He asked what I meant, and told him in confidence that I think I saw someone head to the women's bathroom at night, and that there was no one there. I give him an odd look. I didn't want to give him all the details, just that I felt unnerved and stuff. He gives me a chuckle, slaps me on the back on my way out and says, there's always a ghost or two in here, you don't need to worry about that. My first time seeing it was 10 years ago. They never go away. It comes with the job, bro. He gives me another pat, walks in, and I walk out. I give him a confused look, just as he leaves, and wonder if he's just pulling my chain or not. I try not to think about it much. This happened in 2003, when I was very young. At the time I lived in a small condo, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a connected living room and kitchen, with an island between, and a spiral staircase with random miscellaneous things stored underneath. I was living with my dad, and a mother who was out of the picture. It was Saturday, and I remember specifically watching the TV show, codename Kids Next Door. I was in my bedroom after waking up, and my dad worked a lot of the time, but was such a nice guy that he left the TV on Cartoon Network, as he knew it was my favorite channel. During a commercial, I got up to go to the toilet, but even though I knew I was home alone, I closed the door out of instinct. Boy, am I glad about that. The next thing I comprehended was the sound of my incredibly noisy spiral stairs that can be heard literally across the condo because of how small it is. They began to rapidly make noise that got quieter over the course of about 2 seconds, telling me that whatever made the noise was going downstairs, and fast. As I was quite young, this was extremely concerning, because, as I said, my dad always turned the TV on before he left for work, and so I knew he was long gone. So what did I do? Well, as anyone my age would have done, they half thought they imagined it, and I walked out of the bathroom and looked over the 3-foot-long railings across from the bathroom door, and next to where I would walk down the stairs. And what did I see? None other than an afraid-looking man looking into my living room, but staying hidden under the stairs. After being terrified in the bathroom, I made a distinct effort to be quiet, like a spy, so that there was no way he knew I was looking at him. But he more than likely knew that I was in the house. Okay, so there's a man in the house. I can A, yell at him to leave, and perhaps something bad will happen to me? By the way, there's no exit upstairs, only a balcony with a screen door that has been jammed for years. And even if I somehow got it unstuck, it was a 15-foot drop, and that would be no good. So the only exit was the front door. B. Hide. I opted for option B. I waited for what felt like hours, but was in reality no more than 20 minutes, until I heard shuffling downstairs. Then the sound I was praying for, the front door opening. I was still extremely skeptical, even thinking it was a trap to lure me down, so I stayed put. All day. In view of the TV, by the way, until my dad came home, who I didn't tell about the whole incident, out of fear. I thought that he would be mad at me, so I didn't approach him. Nothing valuable was missing from the house, but you're sure as hell that I checked under the stairs every morning when I walked down them from the next 3.5 years of living there. Why he was there, I have no idea. How he was there, I have a pretty reasonable theory. Simply my dad forgot to lock the door behind him after he left. This man was trying doors in order to get in to make a quick buck, but got cold feet when he was in there. That's my best theory, and I'm glad I never had to find out. I was hiking the Appalachian Trail northbound in early August a few years ago, and I was a day out of Davenport Gap heading to Hot Springs. I don't remember the exact shelter I was at, but I know it was north of Max Patch. That time of year, there aren't many people on the trail, and other than a couple cars at Max Patch, I hadn't seen or spoken to another person in a full day. I decided to end my hike for the day at about 7 p.m. so that I could eat dinner and prepare for bed before dark. I was also filming a little diary of my hike as a gift for my sister. I ate, filmed, reloaded on my water, and hit the hay right as it got dark and the crickets came out. At about 2:30 a.m., I was startled awake, but not by a noise, rather the absolute silence around me. I didn't hear the toads, crickets, owls that you'd expect to hear, and that I heard when I had gone to sleep just 6 hours earlier. I looked around but saw nothing. Everything was perfectly still. I made the decision that I had to get the hell out of there. I packed all my gear in about 5 minutes, threw on my headlamp, grabbed my bear bag and noped all the way up the trail, and made sure I averaged 4 miles an hour in pitch darkness until sunrise. Because of such an early departure, I finished my planned 18 miles into Hot Springs by 10 AM, which was nice. To this day, I have no idea what was there that morning, but I know that something was. I've experienced tons of predators in the woods, from black bears to coyotes, but I've never experienced that calm like that before. Made me think it was some sort of large cat, or worse, some crazy person. Who knows what would have happened if I'd stayed there until sunrise? Maybe nothing, but I wasn't gonna stick around to find out. My mum used to date sketchy guys when I was a teenager. I didn't live with her much because she was a horrible role model. So my grandmother raised me for a big chunk of my life. I'm thankful for that, because she taught me so many values and how to be a lady. I later moved in with my dad and stepmom and half-siblings when I was 15, and had a wonderful life with them. When I was 14, I lived with my mother and her skeezy boyfriend Dale for a year, in the upper half of a duplex. Her boyfriend had this friend that would come over very occasionally, that looked just like the white guy from the Jerky Boys. Same hair too. And he creeped me out, because he would always stare at me, and I would always catch him doing so. My aunt lived down the block, and I would visit her quite frequently because she was the cool aunt. She was in her 20s, super fun and really pretty, and she had a 1969 Firebird convertible that we would drive around in and blast Aerosmith, as this was in the 90s. So with that said, I saw her brother-in-law, Jeff, quite a bit, because he was renting out her basement. I thought he was kind of weird, but an okay guy. So one night at about 11:30, I was home alone, and I get a knock on the door. Now our door had a square glass panel towards the top that was painted over with a little peephole scratched into the paint. I look through, and it's my aunt's brother-in-law, Jeff. I open the door and I'm like, "Hey, what's up?" He asks me if my mum or Dale are home. I said no, that mum was at work, and God knows where Dale is. He then asked me if I wanted to come downstairs, because he wanted to talk to me. I trusted him, because I considered him family, and I was also pretty timid and didn't like saying no to people. So I follow him downstairs to the front porch, and I see his car parked and still running on the street with the headlights on. And sitting in the passenger seat with the windows rolled down was the jerky boy looking dude that hung out with my mum's boyfriend. I paused and was like, And Jeff was like, "Hey, we want to talk to you. We want to ask you something." And he started to gently guide me into the car. My adrenaline was pumping, and all of a sudden, I felt that something wasn't right. I stopped and pulled back a little, and tried my best not to look scared. Jeff kept talking sweetly, running his fingers up my shoulders to fix my spaghetti strap, and saying, "It's okay, just come closer to me." And I pulled away politely and said it was okay. He can ask me right here. He kept sweetly trying to convince me to just come into the car so that we could talk, and said that it was okay if I was scared. I could just stand in front of the headlights. The second he said stand in front of the headlights, my stomach did a leap, and my whole body started to feel electrically charged, because I knew if I were to stand in front of the headlights, I would not be able to see and it would distract me, thus making it easy for one of them to grab me. I knew right at that moment I was in a very dangerous situation, so I started acting ditzy and dumb, because I was afraid that if they thought I was thinking that they were trying to do something, that would land them in prison, he would just grab me right there and then to cover my mouth and drag me to the car, so that I wouldn't tell on him. So I started to playfully joke around, and said that I wasn't wearing shoes, and I didn't want to step in dog poop. Then I see Jerky Boy start to come out of his car, and then I just sprint to the house fast. I ran up the stairs and locked the door. I was shaking so badly. Jerky Boy knocks on the door about a minute later, and is looking through the makeshift peephole. He starts saying that he needs to talk to my mum's boyfriend. I say that he wasn't home, so he goes away from the door, but I didn't hear him go down the stairs. Then 30 seconds later, Jeff comes up and knocks, and is talking through the door, saying that he needs to talk to my mum's boyfriend, and he tries to open the door, but it's locked. I repeat myself, and let them know that they weren't home. Jeff starts saying things like, "I'm sorry we scared you, honey. We just want to talk to you about your mum and Dale," and give other awful excuses. I was scared that they were going to try and kick the door in, so I decided that I was going to try and sneak out the back. I walked towards the back door, and thank God that I looked out the back window first, because I saw Jerky Boy standing downstairs at the back door. So Jeff was at the front door sweet-talking me, and his friend was waiting by the back door. I know what you're probably thinking, right? Call the cops. I don't know why I didn't. I think it was because I was so naive and timid, and this guy was my uncle. I was also questioning myself and my judgment, because Jeff kept reassuring me at the front door. So I get to the front door, and Jeff is still there talking to me, and telling me that he felt bad for scaring me. And I tell him through the door, trying my best to disguise any hint of fear, that it was okay, and that I was sorry I got spooked, and that it wasn't his fault, and I just tried my best to placate him and convince him that I believed him. They eventually left, and once the coast was clear, I snuck out and ran to my friend's house next door. I didn't tell them anything. I just said I was scared and wanted to stay there until my mum came home later. I did tell my mum though. Nothing really happened, and I thankfully moved to my dad's house 45 miles away 3 months later, and I never saw him again. When I look back on it now, years after it happened, I only perceive just how dangerous of a position I was in. I'm so glad I stuck with my gut, ran back and locked myself in, because as most of you can imagine, they had very nefarious plans for me indeed. I was working in an office building and was in charge of stocking the food and drinks we kept on hand for meetings. Think soda and granola bars. We would order deliveries from the grocery store up the street, and I would receive those deliveries and show the delivery person where to put the shipment. This time a man showed up, and I had to tell him where to put the shipment, and then he began asking me questions about myself. He asked if he could have some food of the food he delivered. He told me I was pretty, and he asked if I had a boyfriend. The standard "this guy has no boundary" stuff that you would expect at a bar. My dumb self hadn't realized creeps will also pull this stuff off in the workplace. So he left, and it really rubbed me the wrong way, so for some reason I thought I should tell my boss. So I let her know this guy had been kind of a creep, and had also asked if he could eat some of the food. Just weird, unprofessional stuff. She said she was going to call his company to report him, and I thought, okay, if that's what you think is best. And I got a call from them later to confirm the story. A few weeks later, my boss was told he no longer worked for the company, and that was that. A few days after, I showed up for work at 2 p.m. for my afternoon shift, and the receptionist told me that some guy in a suit showed up asking for me by name. His name was Derek. That's the delivery driver's name. And I got some more details out of her. I confirmed it was the same guy and asked her to note that he should be asked to leave if he ever showed again. So, since no normal person would ever show up at a place of employment of someone they had creeped out, he was clueless and thought I would want him to apologize in person? Was he clueless and thought that he would ask me out? Was he there to berate me for getting him sacked? Or was he there for something more sinister? Regardless, I spent the rest of the day looking over my shoulder. 10 years later, this situation still gives me the heebie-jeebies, because I have no idea why he would still return to look for me. Let me set the stage for you. Last year around October, I was going to a con. A dude I had briefly talked to online said he was going, so I decided to meet there. This person was followed by a ton of people I know on Instagram, so I decided sure, why not follow him? Which is a mistake I would later regret. I met up with him at the con. With him was another girl I had never met before, and her sister. There was another story about what happened between me and her sister, but that is for another day. What happened was me, the girl, and this dude went to a haunted house together a few weeks later. The sister didn't come for reasons I don't want to get into right now, and me and the girl had been talking before that. And so we were talking a lot when we were there, but this dude was acting very strange. He barely spoke to both of us, and I would try and include him in the conversation, but he would always either ignore me or just give me one-word responses. After the haunted house, we went to eat and it was all good, at least I thought it was. A few weeks later, he starts texting the girl all sorts of nasty stuff, calling her every name under the sun, saying how she hurt him, how the house was the worst experience he'd ever had, and how she was stupid and didn't care for him. And I had to calm her down because she was freaking out, because she didn't do anything like that. She blocked him on everything. Me and the girl had been dating for a while before this, and then the next time we met, she told me that the time before the haunted house, that he kissed her even though she said no, that he groped her even though she told him to stop. Keep in mind this dude was a lot bigger than her, and even gross was the comments he was making towards me when I was 15 at the time, saying disgusting stuff like, we should invite him for a threesome. Keep in mind I was 15 and he was 18. He would also talk about very disgusting stuff with her, like how she mentioned her dog died and his response was, yeah, it's because you used it too hard, and went into graphic detail of how he did it with a dog. He told her in graphic detail about how he gave oral to a guy even though she told him she didn't want to hear about it. He was also quite sexist, telling her things like, you're a bad driver because you're a woman, and I'm more attractive than you because you're a woman, and other stupid stuff like that. My jaw hit the floor after all that stuff, and he still had the nerve to berate her and me, pretending that we were all bad guys because we didn't want anything to do with his polyamorous relationships. His girlfriend was really weird too. She kept making comments towards her. Back in March, it ended where it all started, the same con. Me and my girlfriend were in cosplay and were having a fun time, until guess who shows up? He didn't recognize us, so I was just gonna play along and take a picture, but my girlfriend was almost paralyzed. She wasn't moving, she was shaking and had her head down. So I kind of panicked and made up some excuse about how we couldn't do it because she was sick and ran off to another part of the convention. We sat down thinking we'd lost him, but the dude followed us and asked us for another picture. I told him the same excuse again, and then he finally took the hint and left. I called one of my friends who lived in the area, and we went to his apartment and had a decent time. But later on he messaged me asking if I was the cosplayer. I didn't reply. He kept sending more messages until he said, just block me if you're gonna run. And then I thought, you know what, not a bad idea. So I did just that. He tried to berate me by messaging me through different accounts, and told me how frustratingly childish I was. It's rich hearing it coming from him, the guy who throws a temper tantrum whenever someone tells him no, and that's where it ended. If any of you are congoers to the New Orleans and Florida areas, just be safe. That's all for now. So to the guy who can't take no for an answer, mind your own business. Let's not meet again. I thought I'd share a story about one of the more creepy encounters I've had so far. At the time, I was a few months into undergrad in Austin, Texas, and had just become comfortable enough with myself to come out of the closet. At the time, there were no dating apps available, so to find dates I used Craigslist, which was a big mistake. I started chatting with a guy off Craigslist, Craig, and we hit it off and decided to set a time and place for a date to meet in person. His ad said he was 27, and I said I was 18 at the time. At first, he was very insistent on meeting at his place, which I later found out was just a trailer. It kind of made me suspicious, but in his pictures he was very good looking, had a nice smile, so I decided to let it go. Eventually we agreed to get a coffee before going to his place. So the day arrived and I went to get coffee, and I was pretty excited. I had showed my roommate pictures of Craig and talked about how I was looking forward to meeting him. I showed up at the coffee shop and he was already there. He actually did look like his pictures, so that was a good start. We got a coffee and ended up chatting for several hours before he asked whether I wanted to go back to his place. Luckily, my roommate called to check up on me, and it also happened that he was stranded because his car had broken down. So I told Craig that I would take my friend back home before heading over to his place. Well, by the time I picked up my friend, Craig was no longer answering his phone or texts or anything. When he finally answered, he accused me of making up some excuse so I wouldn't have to go back to his place with him, and basically was very angry and annoyed despite our great conversation. I was a bit bummed, but basically didn't think of him again until years later, when my old roommate sent me a link of a news article about Craig. Apparently, he had been running a sex trafficking ring using underage boys that he would lure through his good looks and promises. I could only imagine what would have happened to me if I'd have gone back to his trailer with him that day. It gave me chills as I read the article. I was in Alaska for a couple of weeks on a research trip. I headed up with some other grad students to hike and climb on my weekend off. This was bear country, and just about any other large North American predator you can think of. We had passed the trailhead and traversed a flat area between there and where the inclines really start. It was at the base of the first incline on the trail that we found a human skeletal foot. Just so you know, bear paws and human feet look so similar, you need some serious skill to tell the difference. There are some freaky cool scientific articles on comparison. Anyway, it was only part of it. From maybe about the arch just to about the toes, but the anatomy was correct. There was still some connective tissue keeping the bones in place relative to each other. Other than the dogs we had for early bear detection, nobody but I seemed to be interested in this or concerned. We continued up the trail and spent the day climbing, so many questions remained. What happened? Where was the rest of the skeleton? Scattered by predators or scavengers? Was this so common that my companions were used to human remains in the woods? I'm a 28-year-old male, but when this happened I was 23. I worked at a mum-and-pop pizza shop in Northern Carolina. It's a small farm town and has a few suburbs near it. I kind of did everything since I knew the family, and they trusted me running things while they were gone. This night though, I was working deliveries and got the weirdest one of my life. Everything seemed fine when I took the order the lady ordered, anchovies on her pizza, and I always think that people who order that are weird as hell. She made a point to tell me the pizza had to be hot when it got there, or she wouldn't pay for it. So I get the pizza and throw it in the warmer, and drive to her house before any of my other deliveries. I'd like to tell you guys that her house was creepy and run down, but it looked like your average one-story new housing development home. I rang the doorbell and put on my fake customer service smile. You all know what I'm talking about. As soon as she opened the door, I knew this was going to be bad. The haggard old lady looked like she had been a smoker for over 50 years. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "It better be hot, or I'm not paying for it like I told you over the phone." "I understand, Mom. I made sure to stop by your place first, even though it was last on my list." "Bring it in. Set it on the table." She said this, and now I don't normally go inside customers' homes because I've read way too many stories on no sleep and Let's Not Me. But at this point, I want this to be over quickly, so go along with it and say, "No problem. I also brought cheese and ranch for you in case you need it." As soon as I opened the bag, she grabbed the box and her hand was on the bottom of it, rubbing it. "It's not hot enough. You do this every time, and I'm not paying for it. Not a single dime." One thing I have an issue with is my mouth. I don't know when to just stop talking and try to understand where people are coming from. "Look, lady, your house is a 5-minute drive from our shop, and I stopped by your place first. There is no way that your pizza is cold. If you refuse to pay, you're going to be 86'd, and I'll note you on the account." She immediately walked into her kitchen and came back out. She had old pizza from a week prior that she had ordered and threw it at me. "Take your pizza and get out of my house." She kept calling me Satan and the devil. Again, my mouth has no filter and I can't control it. I try, but I fail every time. As I'm closing the bag and laughing about how much I hate my job, I tell her, "Alright, ma'am, you will not be able to order from us again. I hope you have a great day. God bless you and your house." She kept following me outside to the car, screaming that I was the devil, and there was a family outside that was just watching this go down. So I get into my car and start driving. Once I'm back, I tell my manager what happened, and she told me that the lady had already called in screaming about what had happened. Her story was that I cussed her out, got her order wrong, and my manager shut her down and said that I'd never do anything like that. But here's the weird part. She whispered into the phone to my manager and repeated, "Send him back." She called once a day for nearly 3 months, just whispering to whoever answered. She started driving by the restaurant and yelling that the devil works here and that we're going to hell. Now I wasn't scared. I was just annoyed and wanted to retaliate because I can't tell you how many times she tried to follow me back to my apartment when I got off work. One night I pulled over and got out just for her to stop her car in the road with her lights on, yelling, "The devil is here," after I jumped back in my car and sped off. Luckily, after 6 months of dealing with this lady, I found out she was schizophrenic and bipolar and had not been on her meds. Her daughter put her in a care home, but when she was clearing out the house, she saw that her mum had pictures of me all over her bedroom with the word devil written all over it. She found me and explained everything to me. And that was the end of it. Let's go all the way back to the mid-80s. We lived in the suburbs in a close-knit community, so I never had worries. 11-year-old me is home alone during summer break from school. My mum and dad both worked, so I was just chilling in the living room, blasting the stereo with the front door open. So a bit of backstory. My cousin was dating a guy named Jeff. They're married now with kids. Me and him hit it off instantly. He was a few years older, but treated me like a little brother, so we'd talk and pester each other quite a bit. At this time, we were fairly new in the friendship, but he would call to check up on me. The phone rings, and at this time I didn't have all the fancy things like cell phones or even caller ID. We had a push-button phone, which we brought to replace the old-school rotary dial phone not too long before then. And the conversation goes like this. Hello? What's going on? I think, cool, it's Jeff. Nothing, just hanging around the house. Are your parents home? Jeff knew my parents worked, but perhaps he thought it was their day off. No, they're both at work, man. Oh, okay. So what are you wearing? This is a bit of an odd question. Is Jeff just messing with me? T-shirt and shorts? Are you wearing underwear? It dawned on me at this moment that it's not Jeff. It sounded like him, but my gosh, it wasn't him. Who is this? David. David who? David Sanders. What do you want? I just want to talk to you. I have to go. Okay. See you soon. I hang up. At this point, my mind is racing. I have no idea what just happened. Who the hell did I speak to? And, well, I told him that my parents weren't home. Wait, did he just say talk to you soon? Nah. Okay, I've heard of prank calls before. Someone was just calling random people and messing with them for sure. Yeah, it must have been that. So for about 20 or so minutes I'm roaming around my house with the door open, blasting music and trying to shake off the call. My mind keeps repeating that last line. See you soon. There's no way he could have been serious, right? Okay. Let's go ahead and shut and lock the front door just to be sure. 3 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. I walk up to the front without opening and ask through the door, "Who is it?" It's David. No way. I step to the window by the door and peek out. Sure enough, it's a guy in his mid-20s, smiling, giving me a wave. This cannot be happening. What do you want? I just want to hang with you. My mind is blank. What do I say? What do I do? My dad is home. He's in the bathroom. Oh. Okay. Bye. No way can it be this easy. Of course not. I see the doorknob start to turn. This guy is trying to get in. Fortunately for me, it's locked. I wait a few seconds and look out the window. No one's there. Wait. What was that? I hear someone in the bushes by the front bedroom. I run there and see the guy is trying to open the window. He tries the next one, and the next one, but they're all locked. If I'd have been an adult, I would have dialed 911 as soon as he showed up, and spoken to him through the door until they arrived. But as an 11-year-old, I called my mum. After that day, my parents set up a system that they would call, let it ring, hang up, then call again, and of course don't leave the door open. I never heard from David again, though when I was older I sure thought I would have liked to, and to explain to him why he shouldn't be there chatting up young boys. Let me begin by stating that I am a delivery driver. I've been doing this kind of thing for about 2 years in different jobs, but have mostly worked this current one. I'm a 21-year-old female and have been told that I look about 17. I'm 5'2", and I understand the risks I take with my stature in this job, but I just love it so much. As I'm not actually told that I'm not allowed to go into customers' homes, I almost always say that I am, and that I don't feel comfortable entering most of the time, but do when I feel it's necessary, or I feel safe, or know the customer. There are a few times I agreed to come in. It's simply easier to tell a customer I'm not allowed to enter the house rather than saying I'm uncomfortable, and risk no tip. Also, I'm being descriptive for a reason, so here it is. As I pull up to my next delivery, I am in an area that I'm mostly familiar with, and it's an okay neighborhood, but not the best. It's probably around 8 PM, but since it's winter, it was fairly dark. So I knock on the door, and before I can even ask for a payment or hand him the CC slip, he's invited me in. I tell him as politely as I could thank you, but I'm not allowed into customers' homes, and try to move forward with the transaction and scan my surroundings as I grow slightly suspicious. I see someone a few feet away behind the man, in an electronic, high-tech wheelchair. I don't see much of the room, but I think I heard a woman speaking in the background, but it could have been the TV. At this point, I'm either handing him the CC slip or waiting for payment, and he insists that I enter the house. I'm sorry, it's just safety protocol, sir, I tell him. He replies, I need you to set it down on the table for me. At this point, I'm beginning to question my safety, and I start to contemplate going back to my car and driving off. As I do, I see a table directly behind him. I only ask to set down food in the house if I see that they have many items ordered, such as party occasions, which I totally feel comfortable with since there are plenty of people around. I think this guy had maybe 2 pizzas and some side dishes. As the table is very close to the door, I just couldn't do it even if I wanted to at this point. He was just very shady, and the way he kept persisting I enter his home. I'm sorry, I can't do that. Oh, but that one chick Jenny does it. As there is someone named Jess, so he could have possibly meant her, but I didn't really care. I don't know anyone by that name. Oh, she's been here, he tells me. I've been working here for 3 months, and know for a fact nobody called Janny or any previous drivers by that name. After all this arguing, his final resort is to play the pity card. But my son's in a wheelchair. As I mentioned before, it's a powered one, which means it's expensive, and someone didn't just get into a wheelchair to trick me. But nothing is wrong with the man I'm speaking to, so why does it matter? He then hands me the cash slip, and I notice a tip and say, thank you. Yeah, I gave you a tip so you could come inside and help me. I handed him the food and told him to have a good evening, and I walked to my car and bolted out of there. I live in a fairly wooded area. There are lots of nature trails that lead way back into the middle of nowhere. One night, my buddy and I decide to go for a walk, smoke, catch up a little. He was back from college for Christmas break, and we hadn't seen each other in months. This was something we did many a time in high school. We decided to try a trail we'd never been down before, but had driven past it many times over the years. It leads about 2 miles into the woods and wrapped around a lake at the end. In hindsight, we should have just brought flashlights, but we assumed our eyes would adjust along the way. When in doubt, our lighters would save us. We underestimated how pitch and utterly dark it would be there. We were at the far end of the lake, circling back around, making a lot of noise and being stupid, when my buddy stopped dead in his tracks. I kept talking, thinking he was just lighting another cigarette. "Shut up," he says. "Is that a person?" I looked to where he was gesturing. About 20 feet from us, there was a patch of trees, with something definitely moving around back and forth between them. By that time, we'd been out there for over an hour, and we could make out some things in the dark. There's a moment of apprehension when your heart sinks into your chest, and you begin to fully take in your surroundings when you realize how vulnerable you really are. I don't think I've ever been as caught off guard and terrified as I was in that moment. It wasn't even a fight or flight moment. There was just something in my head that was picking up on the bad vibes in the air. There was no doubt it was a person, by the way that the silhouette moved. My buddy tapped my arm and said, "We're going to run." Then we turned and took off up the path, checking behind us every 5 seconds. We made it up the road, got into his car and drove away. Later, when talking about it back at the house, he confessed the same feeling I had. He said he got the feeling that whatever it was, wanted to hurt us. Moral of the story? Stay out of the woods at 2 a.m. I was at home at my previous apartment, alone. This is a not-so-great neighborhood. My apartment was on the ground level, and my bedroom window faced a back alley. A dumpster sat less than 2 car lengths away, where homeless people often rummaged. Just before dawn one morning, I heard a tapping at my window. My back was to the window, and my eyes were now wide open. It was still dark outside. I sleep with my lamp on, and my worn-out vertical blinds were missing a slat, causing a 6-inch gap. So I knew that whatever/whoever the source of the tapping was, could see me lying in bed plain as day. The tapping was brief, maybe 5 to 6 taps, so I spent the next 5 seconds or so frozen, bizarrely trying to convince myself it was something/anything but a person watching me and tapping at my window. But then came more tapping. Now I was faced with the terrifying reality that something had been watching me through my window in the dark for who knows how long, and he decided to tap on the window. Had one of the homeless people become aggressive during their dumpster dive? Something told me that nothing good can come from turning around and looking at the window. If he got me to look at him, what then? Remember, my back was to the guy, so I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, and pretended I was too groggy to hear him. I stood up and hazily made my way out of my bedroom, as though I were going to the restroom. Once I was out of sight, I ran and called 911, considering whether to forget any embarrassment of being in my t-shirt and underwear, and bolt out of my front door, which was out of sight from the intruder. I just wasn't sure if I could outrun whoever it was, or whether anyone would help me if I couldn't. Before I could make a decision, I heard the loud pop of my window being pried open. I thought my heart would jump from my chest. At the same time, I could hear my upstairs neighbor Mike descending his stairs. I opened my door a few inches and peeked out to ask for his help. Mike was a big guy, and I'd heard he was trained in martial arts of some sort. He didn't hesitate to respond, hustled to the back of my apartment to see what was going on, and within a few seconds I heard rumbling, as someone being thrown against the wall and into the bushes. A few moments later, Mike came around to my front door, telling me not to worry about seeing that guy again. He'd beaten him pretty bad. I wanted to believe Mike, that the would-be intruder was maybe dumpster diving, but that he would hopefully never venture this way again. But it wasn't a homeless person. According to Mike, when the guy escaped, he ran to the front of my building, hopped into a red sports car and sped off. My neighborhood wasn't a red sports car kind of place. The police later told me that the intruder was likely someone who'd seen me out somewhere and decided to investigate and find out where I lived. So, Mr. Window Tapper, I still wonder what you would have done if you'd have gotten inside before Mike caught you. I wonder if you're still lurking where I can't see you. And because of that, I often find myself wishing that Mike had put an end to you. If you found out where I live now, I hope we never meet again. To preface this and give some context, I am a 21-year-old male who makes a habit of taking road trips across the US, and am not one who is inexperienced when it comes to hiking or dangerous situations. I've had people stalk my camp in Kansas and stare over my fire in Utah with a shotgun. Point being, I've had weird experiences, but none that have ever chilled me like this. This just happened earlier today, and I want to get it out there while the image is still sharp in my mind. I was out hiking a trail in southern Indiana with a female friend of mine. It was around 90 degrees and muggy. The trail specifically is the Three Lakes Trail, and is a little over 10 miles long, and is circular, so nearly impossible to get lost. We had arrived in the morning, and so there was almost no one in the park at all, save for a few parked vehicles. We had been hiking the trail for about 3 hours and not seen a soul. Usually I pay attention to my surroundings a bit more, and am cautious of people, just because of life experiences and listening to scary stories. But with good conversations and laughs, I was distracted. My friend and I are walking downhill towards a sharp left turn, when out of seemingly nowhere, a woman steps around the bend and starts hiking up the hill towards us with her head down. She was of average height, but much more muscular than a typical woman. She was wearing a sports bra, short shorts and a backpack, which left most of her body exposed. Her tattoos are what first caught my eye. All across her body are these weird shapes and symbols that didn't make much sense. I didn't see anything that resembled a picture or English word. As she came about within 10 feet of us, she looked up and we made eye contact. And that's when everything in me just froze up. Her face had similar symbols tattooed all over, and in strings all over her face. Her eyes, though, are what I'll remember for a long time. They were just black sockets, and in the shade of the dense canopy, I couldn't make out much about what it actually was, especially with how humid it was that day. I don't believe that the dark sockets were makeup, and so I assumed that all around her eyes were tattooed solid black. On top of this, she must have had colored contacts in her eyes, as there was no white at all. With every horror movie and cult scenario I've ever heard running through my mind, and her face chilling me to the soul, I blurt out, "Good day for a hike." She just looks at me with this empty stare, holds eye contact and walks by us. I have never been so shaken up from running into someone out on a trail before, and hope to never see something like that again. So my sister and I decided to order pizza tonight, and we have used the Domino's app that my sister has on her phone. She went to pick up her boyfriend while the pizza was going to be delivered, and I was to just get it once it was delivered and pay the guy. About 10 minutes later, I'm on my laptop, doing homework, and behold, the doorbell rings. I get up, go to the door, pay for the pizza, and set it down on the counter. I go back to work on the homework I had for my professor tomorrow morning. Later that evening, I was having a bath. I finished up and started to dry my hair when my sister knocked on the door and asked me to talk for a moment. I put on some new pajamas and went down to her room once my hair was dry and asked her what was up. She showed me a text that the pizza delivery boy had sent her, and it read, "Hey, I delivered your pizza. Just wanted to say you look really cute and I wish we could have chatted more." Now you may not understand why this is creepy on my end. This guy went out of his way to get the phone number of someone he delivered pizza to from the app, and sent them a text without the go from the person he was texting. He thought my sister who ordered the pizza was me. I stand at 4'7" and have a baby face. Yes, I am 18, but still look like a child to those who don't know. This guy, who delivered the pizza, was nearly an entire foot taller than me and looked to be mid to late 20s. But yeah, that was really creepy. I just wanted some pizza, man, not looking for a hookup. Jeez. About a year ago, I posted on the Pimp House subreddit, seeking a new friend to chat to and help me escape my usual daily routine. I had recently split from a very long-term boyfriend, and while I didn't want anything romantic again for a while, I thought new friends would be a good idea. After conversing with a number of Redditors who had commented, only one friendship had lasted the duration, and we moved our conversation onto email and Discord. Will, who was almost 30 years old. To begin with, the friendship went well. I might need to add that this guy had never had a girlfriend, so with this in mind, I made it clear that I wasn't looking for anything romantic, and we began to speak on a daily basis. He pestered me for my address in order to send me flowers and gifts. However, I didn't feel comfortable giving Will this information, and didn't wish to lead him on, but thanked him for his kindness anyway. After a while, the friendship got very intense. If I didn't reply to his mail on one occasion, he would basically send out an online search party, bombarded with messages that I was ignoring him, and with another guy all questioning if I had died. Will then found my Facebook and sent me a handful of messages on there, which slightly worried me, as I never gave him my last name and my privacy settings are hella strong. So my birthday arrives, and Will was very insistent that he'd like to send me a gift, a laptop, to allow me to chat with him more regularly, as I could only use the computer at work on my breaks. I naively accepted. He suggested, so that I didn't give him my address, I should give him my PayPal email. So he agreed that he'd transfer some money over to allow me to purchase a present for myself. I appreciated this a lot, of course, and thought that this method would be completely safe. But I was wrong. Now he had my details, and he began to send me money on a regular basis. I don't wish to come off as ungrateful at all, but I felt as if I owed him something in return for this money. As I wasn't in a great place financially, had just had a car crash, and lumbered with so many repair and insurance bills, I couldn't return the kind gestures. He was insistent that I was his friend, and he would help in any way he could, like he would with any other friend, and asked if I could use some of the money he sends towards my debts. Looking back, maybe I should have said no, but either way the money came in regardless of my decision, and I regrettably carried on with life. 4 to 5 months into our friendship, Will confessed his love for me. It's probably important to point out that I had never seen this guy. He would never send a picture as he felt so ashamed with his looks, but nonetheless he had seen me. He began to tell me his masturbation habits and asked for pictures to use, and I quite frankly felt very uncomfortable and told him I didn't wish to discuss this kind of stuff with him. He would send me love songs he had written about me, record his voice telling me the kind of things he wanted to do to me. It carried on anyway. and he refused to accept that my feeling towards him were completely on a friendly level. Will was adamant that I told him as soon as I met a guy. He wanted me to be completely open and honest with him, and I did exactly that. And boy, did things take even more of a turn for the worst. I was bombarded with emails, pages and pages of questions. Had I slept with this guy? What was the exact date? Did I think of Will when the new guy pleasured me? Etc., etc. Complete red flags went off, and after trying to be nice and politely declining to answer the intimate questions, Will got angry. I told him I didn't appreciate the lectures, and that was the last time I heard from Will. A week later, I had around 12 PayPal cases opened up against me. Will had attempted to reverse every single PayPal transaction he had ever made to me in the last year, and told PayPal these payments had been made without his permission. This put my PayPal account into so much debt, around minus £2,500. I saw the balance and cried. There was no way I could ever pay this off, so I began to search for personal loans. This guy had emotionally abused me for so long and made me feel guilty for not returning any romantic feelings towards him, and that was the final straw. Luckily, I sat for a good few hours compiling email evidence that all of these payments were made to me willingly, and I won every single PayPal case made against me. The debt disappeared, and I never heard from Will again. I guess I learned my lesson, and will be completely cautious meeting anyone on the internet in future. I had a lucky escape, and I just hope that nobody else falls into a similar trap, as this guy nearly ruined my life. Will, let's never meet. I once got caught between a mother bear and her cubs. I made it out without a scratch. It was a black bear, so not a grizzly or anything, and she definitely wasn't happy. But she also wasn't clearly prioritizing ruining my day. Here's the full story. I was hiking in New Mexico, Philmont Boy Scout camp, and the trail was switchbacking down a rather steep hill. Me and one friend were walking about 40 feet ahead of the rest of our troop, when I look up, and suddenly about 15 feet away is a black bear. We knew there had been a bear sighted in that area the day before, and we had done all the training about what to do, so we weren't in full panic mode yet. But then we hear a noise from behind, and two bear cubs tumble down the hill and land in the path between us and our troop. They're wrestling. Apparently, that doesn't just happen in the movies. Bear cubs like to wrestle, and completely oblivious to the 15 or so people who now surround them. Their mama is not. Luckily for us, the path was relatively narrow, and they stumbled down again within 10 seconds, just rolling down the hill. The mother had been heading towards us, I assumed to tear our heads off. But as soon as they rolled off, she bounced after them and seemed to forget all about us. The friend who was with me between mother and cubs wet himself. Luckily, I was dehydrated. At the time, we were about a third of a mile from where we were scheduled to camp for the night. And when we got there, the bear rope, a rope strung between two trees that you hang your food from overnight so the bears didn't get to it, had been frayed and was hanging about 5 feet from the ground. So we unanimously decided to go another mile or so to the next campsite. I was raised in a very religious upbringing. My parents would go to church roughly 3 times a week, along with my sisters. However, me being the oldest, and my parents not being too forceful about their religion, I became detached and started not going to church. I'm glad that they were super cool with it. Our church could be intense at times, and there were other families who, when their kids decided not to go, would get disowned. But that really isn't relevant to the story I'm telling today. So, I was home alone. My parents and 2 sisters had gone to church. I was playing on my Xbox and chatting to a few friends while we were doing a task in-game. When all of a sudden, I hear something. Plates. The sound of plates breaking downstairs. I pause for a second and listen intently. There's something downstairs. It sounds like someone's trying to pick up the fragments of whatever was broken. It was a very strange sound. I could hear them distinctly putting them from the floor onto the counter. Were my parents home already? I looked at my phone. They'd only been gone an hour. They're usually gone 3. I was a bit weirded out now. So, I told my team I'd be back in a minute, and crept down the stairs to investigate. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I looked around the corner to listen, trying my best not to make any sounds. That's when I saw him. A man in a mask, still picking up fragments of a mug that had been on our coffee table. The way our house is positioned is that when you open the back door, if you swing the door a bit too forcefully, you can actually hit the table or chair. He must have done so, and in doing so, a mug that was too close to the edge shattered. That was the sound that I heard. However, now I had a problem. There was a stranger in my house without my consent, and I was home alone. In a moment of panic, I stood completely still and debated my options. I could run upstairs. I could try and fetch something to potentially deter this intruder, or I could hide and call for my parents and the cops. Still completely unsure of where I stood, I looked to my left, just underneath the stairs, and saw, very thankfully, that my sister's baseball bat was just there under the stairs. In a moment of bravery, I picked it up and ran screaming like a madman at the top of my lungs, bat in the air. I caught the man completely off guard, and when I got up to him, he just fell to the ground and said, "Okay, I'll leave. That was easy, I thought. He started walking out the house, and I closed the door behind him. He didn't look back and jumped the fence from where he'd came. That's when the most disturbing part happened. I heard voices as my ear was pressed against the door, and it was evident that there had been a car that was still turned on, waiting for him all along. Several voices talked, and they drove off into the night. Could it have been that he was just scoping out the place, and that within a few moments, comrades could have come and swept the house? I'd have had no chance then. I don't know. Part of me doesn't want to know either. I'm just glad that I avoided a potentially uncomfortable and dangerous situation. They never came back, and I never told my parents again, as I didn't want them to take me to church regardless in order for me not to be home alone. However, now I think that that was a mistake. I wish they'd have knew, as I was terrified for months being there by myself, and if I wasn't watching a movie or playing video games with my friends to keep me distracted, I would just sit there, not knowing what to do with myself, letting the fear consume me. If someone breaks into your house, tell your parents and tell the police. It's always worth mentioning. My state has one huge annual convention about 20 minutes from my house. Most of my out-of-state friends only show up from Friday to Sunday, but because of the distance, I decided to show up on Thursday too. I was 17 at the time and had decided to do my first semi-revealing cosplay, and regrettably, I used my real hair. I dressed as Akane Owari from the Danganronpa games, if anyone really cares. Because my out-of-state friends weren't there, I was a bit lonely. But I had a few local friends, and I made friends with a few cosplayers who were around my age, who also cosplayed from the Danganronpa series. I was with the Danganronpa cosplayers when one of us realized there was a convention dance going on at the same time. As a group, we opted to go. We go to dance. It's like typical high school dance, with more meme music and people in amazing costumes. While I'm dancing with the Danganronpa people, I see my friend, Armin, and she was cosplaying as the character from Attack on Titan. She looks really sad, so I go up and ask her what's wrong, and she tells me that she's sad her girlfriend couldn't go today as she wanted to dance with her. Me being the nice friend who I was, close to both girls, offered to dance with her, and she said yes. We were dancing for a few minutes when I see him, Jon Snow. He looked around 25, 6'3", with long greasy hair and tiny round flamed glasses. Jon Snow and his friend walk up to us without asking and cut in. His friend went with my friend, and Jon Snow was dancing with me. The Waluigi cover of Hallelujah comes on and he starts grinding on me while singing in my ear. I try to pull away and he grabs my waist and pulls me closer. After what seems like an eternity, I come up with an excuse that I left my water bottle in a panel room. I needed to get it and got the hell out of there. I went back and found my friend, and the guy who danced with her was a perfect gentleman. Because I used my real hair on the cosplay, I'm honestly terrified he'll recognize me in public or something. But he was a real creep. Winter's not coming tonight. Let's not meet again. This happened to me, and mainly my sister, back in 2008. We're from the Netherlands, a little village called Wiesenhof, which is part of the city of Ningemen. There is a circular path in the woods section of our neighborhood. So, kind of an outline here. Our backyard faced a pond. You had to walk along the pond around 2 or 3 minutes before you would enter the woods. It right away had a path, which would go in a large circle within the woods. Usually people would take their dogs out there, or were just jogging. You know, the typical everyday stuff. It was absolutely beautiful though. Me and my family always took our dogs out in that forest. This circle took us around 20 to 30 minutes to walk, so it was perfect for a good amount of exercise. Anyway, on to the story. I was around 10 at the time, my sister being 14. She decided to take out our dogs and asked me to come along with her, saying that I didn't really have much to do, and she was right, so I said sure. We were walking the normal path. We had one small dog and one big dog. I was holding Jip, the big dog, and he was the typical alpha male dog who always wanted to be up front. Our smaller dog, Evie, was typically very calm and always liked taking her time. She was sniffing on spots for a good length of time, and Jip was getting particularly anxious and wanted to keep on walking, so he was pulling me. Being 10 at the time, he was quite strong, so I told my sister I'd be a bit further up while she let Evie finish up her sniffing spree. My sister was fine with that. We live in a super safe area, just your typical Western European village. No troublemakers around here. Just a super clean-cut area, so we never assumed anything could go wrong. It just never occurred to us. While I had turned the corner of the 4-pointed forest path, I looked back and saw Evie was still profusely sniffing. So I just walked a bit further, out of my sister's sight. Not even a minute later, my sister came quite frantically around the corner, hurrying Evie along with her and told me to keep walking. I saw fear on her face and did as I was told. On the way home, there was no conversation. It was just dead silence. I was of course very scared and didn't know how to react, so I was just keeping up with her pace. Jip also helped with that. But once we made it home, I asked her on what had occurred, and she said she saw a man dressed up as a mime staring at her from behind a tree, and that she tried to act like she didn't notice, but her facial expressions must have given her away, and when she started walking, the mime began following her. Not on the path, but systematically behind each tree. She swore every time she looked back, he was behind the next tree. Apparently when she turned the corner, she didn't see him anymore. I didn't really know what to think. I felt bad that I'd gone further with Jip, but my 10-year-old mind didn't really assume that anything could go wrong in such a safe area, which is why it came across as even more of a shock. My sister never told me any more about it since that day, but she knew for certain she saw a man dressed as a mime. It didn't seem to affect her much afterwards though, luckily, but it must have been quite a scare, knowing that I wasn't in sight and knowing some freak dressed up as a mime was following her. Luckily nothing else happened, and we have since moved. This was years ago, when I was 16 or so, and I was recently talking to someone about it and how in retrospect it was a pretty creepy experience. I'm 32 now. I grew up in a small town a ways outside of San Diego. My parents let me get a job at this pizza place because a couple of family friends had also worked there, and our town was generally viewed as safe. The pizza place had no real adhering to the laws about what one should wear in the kitchen/restaurant environment, and since it was usually over 100 degrees during the summer, I often just wore tank tops and skirts. I delivered an order to this apartment in the middle of town, above a business that was perpetually closed, and the guy was probably in his mid-30s. I remember thinking he was kind of attractive in an older guy kind of way. Super tan, tattoos, no shirt on, and had these striking blue eyes. He asked me to bring the order inside so that he could get the cash, and I did. Again, in retrospect, I know that was so dumb. I went into his apartment and remember he was just looking at me like he was eating me with his eyes. He asked me a few questions about myself, how long I'd worked there and the like, then poured 2 shots of whiskey, and my dumb ass was like, "Oh, cool, thanks." I did a shot with him, and yes, a lot of my co-workers would get offered to smoke a bowl during deliveries, so I was like, why not? And then he started pressuring me for my phone number and asking when I got off. I told him I had a boyfriend when he asked for my number, but he was persistent and really wanted me to come over after I got off. He also kept being really pushy, asking if my hair was naturally red, looking me up and down, and kept asking what time I'd get off, and told me that he would come and pick me up. I eventually left, went back to work, and thought it was kind of weird. Nothing ever came of it, but I always got a sort of sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach whenever I drove by the apartment. I had told my manager that he was trying to get my number and come over after work so that he wouldn't let the shops take orders from that guy anymore. I think about how dumb I was to A, go into the apartment, B, take a shot of a liquid that could have been anything really, and then, thank goodness, I wasn't stupid enough to go there after work. When I was about 6 or so, my family lived in an older 2-story house. My stepfather would be the first to tell you that the house had a spooky vibe. I often had strange things happen, but only once Was there ever an event with multiple witnesses and no explanation? My parents went out one night and left my older brother in charge of my younger brother and I. The master bedroom was upstairs, and my parents left the window cracked. It is important to note here that the window creaked loudly, and the screen is hard to remove. We were downstairs in the living room. Outside, the wind started picking up. I was already on edge because of the noise the house made and the wind. My mother was a very religious person at the time. In the center of her bed, after making it in the morning, she placed a large, hardcover King James Bible. It weighed at least a couple of pounds. Well, as we were watching TV, we heard a very loud thump. We looked at each other, all knowing it came from upstairs. When we went to investigate, there on the floor was her Bible. We checked the room and no one was there, and there wasn't enough time for someone to get back out. Somehow this heavy book had fallen off the bed without disturbing the blankets at all. We left it as it was, and our mother questioned us about it when she got home. My stepdad checked the window inside and out for evidence of entry, but there was none. Nothing had been taken or disturbed, except the Bible. I was out on the trail. A snowstorm was incoming, but still a number of hours away, so everything was deathly still, and at dusk, so I had my headlamp, knowing I was coming back after dark. Gorgeous evening for a run in a forest. I'm extremely familiar with it, and I got a kilometer in, and that feeling just careened into me. From, hey, kinda uneasy, to paralyzed within seconds. It was the feeling of being watched or stalked. Sudden pit in your stomach, hair stand up. A feeling that something is wrong and that you need to get the hell out of there. If you get that feeling, it's best to leave. There's a sort of primordial gut sense that our ancestors had, and we still have some of it today. Suddenly, the urge to pee comes over me. Completely unwilling to move, every leaf crunch was like thunder. This is my brain filled with a vision of what was up. My brain gave me this mental image of an instinct predator on the other side of the small hill ahead of me. It knew I was here, it was looking for a snack just before the snow came in, and it was waiting. I felt like prey. And now I know what a deer feels like when they get caught in headlights. It was just the freakiest thing. It felt like predator/prey mind meld. I tried for a few seconds to be like, oh, I'm just paranoid, and tried to take a few steps towards it. And it felt like there was a physical brick wall in front of me. I got out of there after standing dead still for about 2 minutes. There were no birds, no squirrels, no small creatures bumbling in the leaves. I ended up walking back down the trail, feeling like my neck and back were on fire, and I sprinted the last 100 yards to my car. I felt way better in my car, but the feeling didn't fully dissipate until I was about a mile away. I've never gotten that sensation on that segment of the trail or in those woods since. Even my long, rainy, dark swamp runs aren't anywhere near that. My brain must have just run away with my imagination there, but I'm totally okay with that. I'd rather listen on the off chance that I'm right. I had not been awake for long when a loud knock sounded from our front door. As I stood on the landing, I could hear my mother open the door and begin joking with whomever was there. I couldn't make out much of the conversation. It didn't concern me too much. According to my mother, he had a parcel for us and wanted her to sign for it. He had no pen, so she began to close the door so that she could fetch one. Suddenly I heard my mother scream loudly. There's a man's voice shouting too. Suddenly I heard my mother scream loudly. And there was a man's voice shouting too. Police! This is a raid. I was shocked. I ran halfway down the stairs to see what was going on. I saw a man in his 50s with short hair and a beard, wearing a fluorescent orange vest. He was standing almost at our doorway and my mother was screaming, trying to shove him out. He was clearly no police officer. Instinct kicked in. I threw myself down the stairs and against the door. My mother repeatedly hit the man in an attempt to shove him out. I screamed as loudly as I could to try and attract his attention, but nobody came to our aid. We managed to shove him out of the door with our combined force. We had the door almost shut when suddenly a large shove threw it back open. I was thrown back and my hip collided with the corner of our electronic meter cupboard behind the door. Before I knew it, there were two men, the orange vest wearing man and another dressed in a dark coat that obscured his face. In a blur of screaming and hitting and shoving on the door, we managed to get them out again. My mother realized that they wanted the fake parcel back. She picked it up and threw it at their heads. This time, instead of trying our door, they hurried off around the corner off the street. Once the door was locked, I asked my mother if she was all right. Both of us were shaking and could barely breathe. We should have called the police right away. But the first thing we did instead was to call my dad. I was in complete shock, concerned mostly about my mother, who was crying on the phone. My dad came home from work immediately and came in to see us while we called the cops. It wasn't until they arrived that I finally broke down crying. We put in a report and gave statements. The police couldn't find any fingerprints on our door despite everything that had happened, and we gave them the CCTV from our front window. It didn't get everything, but it was a good shot of both their faces. We couldn't stay in the house after that. Every time there was a knock on the door, I would feel so afraid that I would begin to cry hysterically. We moved out a month later. Even now, 3 years after, I'm still suffering after this event. Knocks on the door make my heart pound in my chest, though I now have the courage to answer. I am always afraid it may happen again. Every time I see someone wearing a fluorescent vest, I get scared and I begin to shake. The police did nothing, despite the fact that my mother broke 3 fingers in the scuffle, and I came away with plenty of bruises. Our case was shelved for 6 months. We still have no idea why they chose us. We don't know what they had planned or who they were, and I still feel ill every time I think what could have happened if they had succeeded in getting into our house. I spent a few months in the Four Corners area, across the San Juan River from the Navajo reservation. I hiked a lot, and visited a lot of ancestral Puebloan ruins. These were usually high above the bottom of the canyon, under rocky outcroppings, almost always hard to reach. I spent a half hour scrambling and climbing up to a little stone room I spotted while walking in a slot canyon. I hoisted myself carefully through the small doorway and tumbled onto the floor. The first thing I noticed was a set of large black clawed scaly feet sticking up in the shadowy corner of the room. They were so large they startled me when I first spotted them. I could see they were birds' feet, probably a large raven, and they looked like they were tied together by a small black bundle. As my eyes adjusted, I realized they weren't bound together by cloth. They were still attached to the bird's body, which looked unnaturally small because the head and wings had been removed before the body was placed feet up in the corner. By the back wall of the room was a small conical structure made of carefully stacked bare pieces of twisted desert wood. I used a piece of the wood to probe the bird, and found that the joints of the feet were still pliable, meaning the bird had been placed there very recently. Traditional Navajo beliefs ascribe power to places like ancestral Puebloan ruins, lightning-struck trees, etc. This power can be used for good or evil, and can harm those who trifle with it ignorantly. So either the raven flew into the room so fast that its wings and head evaporated, or the raven and woodpile were part of a ritual-looking thing to take advantage of the power traditionally ascribed to such ruins. I replaced the wood in the pile and left. Me and my friends went to a local cosplay meetup at a park. I was dressed as Yunagasai from Future Diary, Mirai Nikki, an anime, and my friend was dressed as a Final Fantasy character. Throughout the whole thing, I noticed a man was watching us. At first, I thought he was just staring at the group because we looked like a bunch of freaks. He was a little way away, so I couldn't really tell. When we were doing photo shoots, the man was still there, but this time he had a camera out. I guess he just wanted to take pictures of the group and share it on Facebook or something. But then I noticed he only ever took pictures of me and my friend. At first I thought he was just taking pictures at random, so I didn't really think about it much, but I did feel odd. Well, we were sitting down, group photo shoot still going. We were sitting a little ways away from everyone else under a tree for shade. Then I noticed the guy walking towards us. This was when I started getting alarm bells. They weren't on red alert, since I thought maybe he knew where we were from and wanted to take pictures of us, which is what usually happens in these situations, but I didn't like the vibe he gave off, so I didn't let my guard down. He asked what was going on, and I told him it was a cosplay meetup. He told me he heard about cosplay since he attended Comic-Con. Okay, I thought maybe I was wrong, but should be careful. He didn't ask to take a picture with us, but kept looking us up and down and asked if I was from High School of the Dead. I told him about Future Diary, and he knew where my friend was from since he played the game. I fell silent. I started feeling uncomfortable since neither of us were talking. I broke the silence by telling him that we should be getting back to the group, and I took my friend's hand, and we were about to go when he grabbed my friend's other arm and pulled her towards him, saying that we should talk more. He started touching my friend's skirt, which was pretty short. I was on red alert and slapped his hand away, pulled my friend away, called him a perv and rushed back away from the group. The guy left shortly after. Back when I was 11 or 12, I was on a day trip out in the woods with my dad. It was kind of a secluded area, and no people lived around for miles, and the trail itself wasn't maintained anymore. We saw no one else, and that was normal. No other cars there. A little while later, probably a good mile and a half from the entrance, we stopped walking to relax for a bit. I had found a nice solid stick during the walk and was fooling around with it. There was a semi-rotten stump where we had chosen to sit, and I discovered hitting it with the stick actually made a really nice thunk noise that was quite deep. So I hit it a few times, hit rest, and hit rest. I followed that pattern, and after a few seconds I realized there was an echo from even further, deeper in the woods. Not too weird, as there was definitely enough stuff in the area that would bounce the sound back. So I kept messing with it, and my dad joined in too. In total, it was about 5 to 10 minutes of playing with the stick and stump, and we stopped and decided we were going to grab our stuff and head back. Then from the deep woods came 3 distinct thunk noises. It couldn't be an echo at this point. We looked at each other confused and were wondering what it was. Like I said, other people being this far out into the spot was very unlikely. But then 3 thunks came again, much closer than they were before. We grabbed our stuff, booked it out of there, and still don't know exactly what it was. Had it been a person, they would have had to have been sprinting to move that quickly between sounds. And if it was a person, why were they coming right for us? Never been back to that area since. Back in 2001, I would have been around 8. My family drove out to buy a used car in the next state over. Turns out to be the cheapest and most reliable car we'd ever purchased. But the drive back was far more eventful than I would have liked. We were on a 4-lane highway, 2 lanes per side, grassy center ditch, when a man of about 25 driving a small red 2-door car lost control on the opposite side of the road. It was later suspected that he fell asleep at the wheel. His vehicle crossed the ditch and went airborne ahead of us while spinning rapidly. He was thrown through the side window and landed in the road ahead of us as his car tumbled into the ditch on the shoulder. We stopped, others stopped, an ambulance was called, but that didn't stop me from hearing the guttural groans of this poor guy begging for help. There was blood all over his skin and all over the road. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. My dad told me that we should go somewhere else, and that being the technologically interested person I was, we wandered towards where the car had landed a few hundred feet away from the dying man. It smelled of steam and gasoline. And pizza. A Domino's delivery bag and pizza box sat hanging half out the tail end of the car, with the pizza falling out. He was probably a delivery driver doing a semi-local delivery when he crashed. That was the moment I realized how fragile life is. We can be doing the most mundane task and still be in mortal peril. I can still hear the groans of the driver as he lay crumpled on the road. The rain, the clouds, the smell of pizza. You don't forget things so terrible that you see when you're so young. They stay with you. The man passed at hospital, or so I was told. If only he'd have worn his seatbelt. If only he had gotten another 30 minutes of sleep the night before. So many things could have prevented such a sad thing from happening. The most surreal experience I had was during an off-trail hike in the Rockies. I was extremely depressed and spending a day away from an awful ex. I wasn't really sure what my plan was, but I fell on my ass through ice into a shallow stream that I was crossing and just said, "Well, I'm not going back to my car." Just near the top of a steep hill, I almost stepped on some sort of leg bone. I was like, "Oh, that's cool," until about 3 feet away I saw several more limb bones and most of a spine between a couple mounds. I didn't see fresh blood, but was fairly confident it was regular territory for something that I didn't want to meet. I kind of froze and looked around me since I hadn't heard anything so far, so decided to get a few pics and then slowly left down the hill. About halfway down, I turned back up the hill because I figured I was overthinking it and didn't really want to go home. About 5 steps back up, and I definitely heard some animal walking around atop the hill, and I didn't want to stick around to find out what it was. I was an only child, and my parents both had to work evening and night shifts frequently. They were doctors, you see. So, for me, that meant total freedom when they were away. I had long gotten accustomed to them not being around sometimes, and I honestly relished in my time alone, giving me time to draw and make things out of clay, which are one of my passions and hobbies to this day. I was home alone, like I would be on most nights, and I think I was trying to draw something complicated as part of a school project. As I was just smashing away with my pencils, did I hear something downstairs. talking. People were talking. I thought I was insane. I started making my way down the stairs, thinking that my parents had gotten home early. It was exceptionally early for them to arrive. I started talking back to them, asking why they had arrived so soon. And as I reached the bottom step to look round the corner, did the talking completely stop. I looked around, and there was no one home. Could there have been an intruder? I thought. I went to grab the door handle, pushed it down, and sure enough the door was locked. The back and the front. No windows were open, and no one had opened them in a while, it being winter and all. After giving a brief check, was I 100% certain that there was no way anyone was in this house. Confused, thinking that perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me, did I ascend the stairs again to continue my drawing. But not 20 minutes later, did the talking start up again. This time, more animated. It sounded more like 5 or 6 people having an energized conversation. This time I was confident that I wasn't mad. But with more caution did I begin to descend the stairs. I listened, sitting there, sure that they were saying something. I was trying to pick up on their words, but I couldn't really hear them. It was almost as if they were speaking a bit too fast for their words to understand, but I could pick up little bits and was sure they were speaking English. When I hit the bottom step and started to turn to go towards the kitchen, did the noise all of a sudden stop. I ran in. No one there. At this point, I was beyond terrified. I called up my grandma, who lived 10 minutes away, and asked her to come and collect me, giving no explanation. When my parents got home at 2 a.m., I was still awake, and told them what had happened. My dad sat down with me on the sofa and explained something that I will never forget. That these noises had happened for a long time, and that he's surprised I hadn't heard them sooner, but that they're nothing to worry about, and that he didn't know what they were, but it's best just to leave them be. I was incredibly unsatisfied with that explanation, and sure enough, from time to time, the noises would start up again. Sometimes it would be a few, sometimes it would be many, but consistent they would be. We didn't live in that house long after that, and I almost forgot about this experience entirely, but it is one of the many mysteries of life that has weighed on my mind. A couple of months ago in late fall, I went to climb Bear Mountain in northwest Connecticut in the very early morning. I hike a lot by myself, but for some reason this spot was giving me the creeps. It was just barely light out, and the woods were thick. All the leaves had fallen, and it was dead silent. It really reminded me of the Blair Witch Project. As I hadn't been out on this trail before, I was going really slowly, trying to take it all in. As I walked, I was shuffling the leaves with my feet, just to make some sort of noise so that it wasn't so eerie. That's when I heard what distinctly sounded like a rattlesnake. It made me jump back, but then I got to thinking it was pretty cold, and fall, and there are definitely no rattlesnakes on this little mountain. Those things live in the desert. I was just creeped out altogether and figured I was hearing things. I continued with my hike and then went home. It wasn't until a week later that I was reading about the mountain I had climbed. They had a website with a taxonomy section, and that's when I saw it. There were rattlesnakes on that mountain. Even worse, it went on to explain how they can be seen lounging on warm rocks in the summertime, but in fall, They hide under thick layers of fallen leaves to keep warm. The same leaves I was kicking. I got very lucky that day. I was at least an hour walk from my car and probably another half hour, at the very least, to the nearest hospital. When I was 14, my dad and I lived in a small studio apartment on Hollywood Beach in Florida. We didn't have any money really, but we treated ourselves to takeout every other Thursday night from the same Chinese place a few blocks away. They were family run, so the same guy came to deliver the food every time. We found out later he was the adult son of the woman who owned the restaurant. It was my job every other Thursday to answer the door and pay for the food while my dad found something on TV for us to watch while we ate. And never once did this unassuming Asian guy ever give me a reason to feel uncomfortable. He was short and tan, with grey hair and glasses. I was friendly but not talkative. At 14, I was still in my shy stage, and we never had a conversation other than the typical, "Hello, have a nice day." During that time, I was left home a lot. Both my dad and I felt like 14 years old was enough to spend a few hours home alone in the afternoons after school. I was also very close with the woman who lived next door, and her goddaughter, so I would spend a lot of time over there when my dad wasn't in. I walked home from school as well, and it was one afternoon after school, an hour or so after I got home, that the phone rang. This was 2004, so having a home phone was still really common. Ours was set up on the side table in the main room of the studio apartment. I answered it, and for a second I thought there was going to be no one on the other end, because there was a long pause, then a sort of stammering that I couldn't really understand. "This is Alan," which was barely understandable because of the heavy Asian accent. I say Asian because I'm not sure if it's okay to assume they were just Chinese. By now you obviously know that Alan is the Chinese delivery guy. But at this point of 14, I was confused. I say something along the lines of, what? "Your delivery guy, Chinese delivery." Now I'm even more confused. What does Alan the delivery guy want? Did you order food?" "No, we did not." And I tell him so. He's quiet for another second, then, you home alone?" My heart dropped into my stomach. Now I'm pretty sure I know what Alan the delivery guy wants, and yes, I was home alone. But I wasn't about to let him know that. My first instinct was to tell him my dad was home, but his work van wasn't outside, and I realized that Alan had been to our house enough over the last few years to know my dad's van, and if he drove by, he would know he wasn't home. "Oh, my uncle's here." And immediately, I think it's a horrible attempt to lie, and Alan is going, "Why?" He is quiet for a moment, then a statement, not a question. "You are home alone." I'm stunned, and have no idea what to say now, as I'm trying to think of something. "Never mind," he says, and just hangs up. I'm so weirded out, and scared at this point, and even though part of me thinks I'm actually scared of him for whatever he had planned, another part of me says go lock all the doors, so I do, front and back. By the time I get back to the front room from locking all the doors, I look out the front windows and see a car parked in the driveway. It's Alan, just sitting in the car. The windows are rolled up and lightly tinted, but I can see him behind the steering wheel staring at the house. 30 seconds later, the house phone starts ringing. I don't answer it. Alan stays parked in the driveway for 5 more minutes, and I stand looking out the window the whole time, thinking to myself that the second he gets out of his car, I was going to grab a utensil from the kitchen. I'm such a dramatic young woman. The house phone begins to ring one last time, and I don't answer it. As soon as it stops ringing, the second time, I pick it up and dial 911. I was terrified, but not because of Alan. I was afraid my dad was going to be angry with me for calling the police. It's a completely different story, but he and the law have not been on the same side, and I was always raised with a subliminal sort of aversion to the police and the idea that anything I couldn't handle myself, my dad could handle for me. Alan drove away while I was on the phone with the operator. I was in the middle of telling her that he was calling the house and parked in the driveway, when he just put the car in reverse and sped off down the street. The police took a statement from me when they got to my house, then sent me next door to hang out with the neighbour and her goddaughter. We sat on the front porch and I told her the story of what happened, while the officers went down to the restaurant to talk to Alan and contact my dad. In the end, Alan was able to get off with a warning by telling officers there was a confusion and he thought that we had ordered food, which his mother confirmed. When asked why he wanted to know if I was home alone, he said he was trying to get an adult on the phone. The police told them they will have to have someone else make deliveries to customers in my area from now on, and to make sure that Alan keeps his distance. In all honesty, I think it was my dad's phone call to the restaurant later that really made Alan realize he had messed up, and not the warning from the cops. He was fuming when I told him this story, as I imagine most fathers would be. He called the restaurant and spoke to the woman who owned it in the first place, then somehow convinced her to put Alan on the phone. What followed was one of the greatest conversations I have ever heard, even if it was only my dad's side that I was hearing. Nothing makes you feel more loved than your dad in macho protection mode. My dad threw insults that I had never heard before, and I was in middle school, a kingdom of insult connoisseurs. I knew that it was a very serious situation, and I knew that my dad was really angry. But I was in the background, stifling my laughter into a pillow. At one point, my dad asked Alan what the hell he was thinking driving over here, to which Alan responded something about being lonely, and my dad said, "If I ever catch you on this street again, Alan, if I ever hear that you were near this street, I'll make sure that you are lonely for the rest of your life by ripping your member off and choking you with it." We stopped eating Chinese after that. From my house, there's a medium-sized field down the road, wrapped with a sidewalk. The field is like a place for soccer games, hikes and various other activities like that. And there's a playground in the corner and trees every so often by the sidewalk. In the back corner of the park was also encompassed by a brick wall, there was a little gate that you could just unlatch and walk through. So I do because I enjoy exploring. It leads to a canal that runs along our freeway. I went here often when I used to live there. I would just escape everybody and sit by the canal and watch the water flowing through, with my dog by my side as we relaxed in the morning sun. I stayed away from the tunnel for the canals. The canal just kind of goes underground for a moment to go under some train tracks, because there were a lot of gang writing there. But that doesn't even play into the creepy part of the story. One day, I decided to walk down the rest of the canal and see if there was anything interesting I could find. Suddenly my dog decided she was really not fond of the brick walls next to the canal. Now, at this area, the park had ended, and it was now the back of houses that faced the canal with the brick wall behind them. So basically, house to brick wall to canal to freeway is the scene. I stare at this house with my dog, and it doesn't like it. Then I look at the ground, as there was something odd there. It's a cat's skeleton. I take a bit of a closer look. It's not just one cat. There are at least 4 to 5, and it looked like they were just chucked over the brick wall from the house. My first thought is obviously this guy is crazy. It was just the most uneasy sight I'd ever come across. We left straight away, and I rarely went back to sit at the canal after that, until we moved. Probably should have reported it, but I was only 11 at the time, and didn't think it was a thing that you could report. When I was 16, my mum and sister had gone grocery shopping. I was just home, listening to the radio and playing my Nintendo, when all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. I look up and see two well-dressed gentlemen with briefcases. I go open the door and ask them what they need. They tell me that they're new to the area and are trying to collect funds to save a children's centre from where they're from. I didn't ask for any more information, but told them that my parents aren't home, and therefore I didn't have any money to give them, and asked them to kindly move on to the next house and wish them luck. I was quite happy with my response, feeling like a confident young adult, closing the door and returning to my game. However, I had just given them a little bit of information that I shouldn't have. I told them I was home alone. I didn't think much of this at the time, not until they started creeping around our yard. They went round the side of the house and got into our backyard and started peering in. I looked at them and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" They said that they were just looking around. I was getting angry at this point and told them to leave or I'll call the cops. But they didn't do anything. They kept looking around our backyard. I was starting to get agitated and picked up the phone and started yelling at them. "I'm gonna call them." They still didn't react. I punched in the numbers and told the operator that there were two strange men in my yard and asked what I should do. She said to hide and that cops would be there soon. So I did. Of course, like in every story, the moment the cops arrive, these two people are gone. I told the cops about what I'd seen, and they thanked me for the information, and that was that. My mum and sister get home, and I let them know that the cops had come, and that two strange men had been looking around. I wasn't feeling very safe, but I put this to the back of my mind. About 2 months down the line though, the two men get arrested, and we see it on the news. I look at their faces, and it's them. I walk out the room at that point, horrified. My parents fill me in that they weren't good people, and had very bad intentions. I don't even want to know what they would have done to me, or what they were doing walking around my house. I just know that I'm lucky I called the cops, and that they responded so quickly, as things could have taken a very different turn had I not acted on impulse. Back in high school, I landed my first job as a pizza delivery boy for a pizza shop in my area. I had the perfect car for the job, an '03 Prius, as it was great for gas. The job itself was not half bad, and in the location and where I lived, the customers gave out great tips. However, after this experience it made me quit my job. I was working the night shift with 1 hour left of my shift, when I got a call for a regular cheese pizza. I wrote down their address and told them that I would be there quickly. After the pizza was done, I got into my car and plugged the address into my GPS. At about halfway through the drive, my GPS led me down this extremely narrow road surrounded by nothing but forest. A few minutes down this road, I spotted an old, boarded-up house, and my GPS told me that I had arrived. I pulled into the driveway and double-checked to make sure I had the right house. It was. I decided to at least knock on the door before leaving. As I got out of my car, I noticed the yard was poorly kept, and there was a bunch of trash lying around. I got to the front door and knocked. Nothing. So I knocked again and shouted, "Pizza delivery!" Then I heard a knock at the window next to the door. I turned to look at a wrinkly old man, waving at me with a disturbing smile through the window. He told me through the glass that the front door was locked, and told me to go round the back door. Sure thing, but deep down I wanted to get out of there ASAP. I told myself I had made it this far, and that I may as well finish it out. Plus, I wouldn't have to deal with my boss chewing me out for bringing a pizza back. As I trudged to the backyard, I was hit by an invisible wall of the stench of death. As I looked down, I saw dozens of perished animals, ranging from small mice all the way to deers. Disturbed, I knocked on the back door as the man from earlier opens up. I could only see half his face, the same disturbing smile, but this time his eyes were bloodshot and he smelt of iron. I gave him his pizza and told him that it was $6.99. Out of nowhere he asks, "Do you like my collection?" I looked at him with a very odd face, when I then heard footsteps running on the grass behind me. I turned around to see someone in a dark hoodie with a red ski mask running towards me with a knife. I bolted for my car, and within a minute I had started the engine and peeled out the driveway. I get back to the shop and told my boss everything. He called the cops, and when they arrived, they found the house empty. The cops stated that the house had been abandoned for years, and no one was supposed to be living there. The next day I told my boss that I was quitting. He offered me to change positions, but I told him that I wasn't interested. A while after, I found a job at a small electronic retail store. I hope to never meet those two creeps again. When my partner and I were through hiking the Eastern Continental Trail in Canada, we were at one of the longer, more remote sections. We were about halfway through the hiking section through a curvy tree-covered tunnel, where you can only see about 15 to 30 feet ahead of you at the time. All of a sudden, 15 feet ahead of me is this old, skinny, tall man standing on the side of the trail. This man had no backpack or anything that remotely resembled equipment to be this far out in the backcountry. At first I wasn't thinking anything of it, and stopped to say hello, as my partner walked up from behind. The man barely even looked at her, and started acting a little creepy. I take a quick glance down at his coffee mug in hand, thinking I'd jokingly ask him what the hell he's doing out here with only a coffee mug. That's when I see his hand is dripping in blood. I didn't say anything about it, but quickly said, "We better keep hiking. Have a good day." As we were hiking away, I told my partner about his bleeding hand. We hiked for the next 4 hours, constantly looking back over our shoulders. Later I checked the map and realized that there was a road about 1 kilometer away that ran parallel to the trail. So it could have been possible that this man was just out on a little morning hike to look over the ocean views, but it still freaked the hell out of us at the time, and I still wonder why his hand was all bloody. It has taken me 4 years to feel entirely safe sharing this. Hell, even now, I still feel nervous sharing my story. But I need to get it out there, not only for my sanity, but hopefully as a cautionary tale for others who may turn to the internet for love. Back in 2015, I had just turned 16, and quite frankly was not a stable person. I was dealing with a handful of mental illnesses. Some I have overcome, thank goodness, but others I have yet to defeat. And one of these was depression. I was so lonely. I felt like I had nobody in the world. I then found this app, almost like Omegle. I can't remember the name of it to save my life, and I made an account. From this you could chat from anywhere in the world and with random people. Some of them I spoke to were normal and actually real, but there was one person who changed everything for me. It was a few days before Valentine's Day. and me being the lonely and stupid person I was, I went on the app and started browsing through to find new friends. That's when I met him, Michael. He was from the UK and about 2 years older than me. We struck up a conversation right away and we exchanged Skype usernames. He was very affectionate and knew just what to say to get your heart warmed. Now I may have been an idiot, but I kept getting the feeling that something wasn't right. Although he seemed genuine, something didn't sit right with me. He said he loved me within hours of talking to me, which now, as a 20-year-old, is completely bizarre and a huge red flag. But I was a stupid kid desperate for love, so I fell for it, but didn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, we spent most of the day talking about random stuff, his family, school, our favorite things. That's when I got curious. I searched his name in Google only to find an article that made me sink. He was real, but he was a monster. Apparently he had gotten a 13-year-old girl pregnant after months of sexual abuse and somehow escaped jail. I was horrified. I confronted him and he flipped out. He told me to kill myself and logged off. I was so scared by the whole thing that I slammed my laptop shut and cried for the rest of the night. I didn't know what to do. I knew that I did something terrible and I felt so much guilt about the whole thing, mainly because I trusted this guy, and to find out the terrible thing he did to that poor girl made me sick to my stomach. My heart hurt for her. This story doesn't end there. Although I never did meet my ex, shortly after, I never got past the feeling of guilt from this. I reached out to the person who wrote the article, mainly because he was in close contact with the person investigating this guy. And since I'm in the US and he's in the UK, I didn't know if there was much that could be done. He was very nice and told me that I did the right thing by contacting an adult about the situation, and he told me the stuff he was allowed to share with me about this person. He asked questions of his own about this and showed a lot of concern as this person was a dangerous individual. He said he was still looking into the story and that my account helped, as now he has moved from the real world to the digital world. I never heard anything from the reporter after that, and life subsequently went on. But I have never forgotten those days, and likely never will. I still feel the guilt for not doing something, the fact that he could do this again to another girl. I know it was my fault for trusting him, but I've gotten smarter with my online life and am more careful with who I'm talking to and what I share. I am now 20 years old and in a very, very healthy and happy relationship with someone new, and my mental health has improved significantly. But this event will always linger in my mind. Michael, let's never meet again. I was sitting on a large hill outside a forest, overlooking an apartment complex, with some friends back in high school. We were all playing light as a feather, stiff as a board, when we noticed 4 guys walk out of the forest a few hundred feet away, putting on gloves in the middle of summer. One proceeds to pull out a gun, and one of my friends freaked and gasped way too loud. And one of the 4 guys looked over at us. 2 guys continued on their way, but 2 started to walk towards us. So we took off in the opposite direction. They followed us and started chasing us. We all fled into the woods and ran until we got to a neighborhood and hid under some guy's deck for what felt like an hour. They chased us all the way through the woods. They were just probably some punks about to rob some apartments, and they thought it would be fun to mess with the high school kids. But we were positive at the time that they were going to end us. This encounter happened when I was about 10 years old. My sister and I were home alone since it was during the summer. Both our mum and grandmother were busy and therefore could not stay home with us. We were used to being alone during the summer, so it was not a big deal. The only thing we could do was not go outside nor open the door if someone knocked. During this day, I had gotten up and started to play The Sims 2 in our kitchen. My sister was watching TV in our den. A few hours into gaming, I thought I heard the doorbell ring. At first, I thought it was my game, but I had turned off the sound. So I asked my sister if she heard the doorbell. She replied that she had not, and she said it was probably just the show she was watching. I brushed it off and resumed playing my game. About 10 minutes later, I see a reflection on my computer of a man in a suit. His hands cupped around his eyes, looking through the glass door behind me. I turned around to be face to face with this strange man who I had never seen before in my life. I had no idea how long he had been watching me. He waved at me like he knew me from somewhere. I called my sister's name, who had not noticed the man yet, and she grabbed the home phone quickly to call my grandmother. Now, we had seen a salesperson before. None of them looked like this guy. He was wearing a full-on black suit that did not fit him. If not strange enough, this guy was wearing a full suit in 99 degrees and was also carrying a briefcase. All the salespeople I had seen only ever carried a clipboard, maybe a few flyers, but this man had a briefcase. The next flag that came with this guy was when he walked around our house to come to the back door, which during his little trip, he would have seen that there wasn't a car in the driveway, indicating that no one was home. As I was getting up to hide, the man reached down and grabbed the doorknob. He started jiggling it forcefully. Thankfully, the door was locked. He looked at me smiling, gestured at me to come and unlock the door for him. All the noise he had been making had now set off our 75-pound Labrador mix, making her go absolutely mad. No way was she going to let that guy in. My sister tells me our grandmother is now on her way, and she wanted us to hide in the back of the house in her room until she could get home. My sister hands me the phone, then runs into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we have. I can hear her yelling at the guy that we had called the cops. She comes back into the room with me, and we close the door. She tells me that she lied about calling the cops, and said that he started laughing, like she had just told him the funniest joke he had ever heard. A little while later, we hear the door open, and it's my grandmother calling us. We come out to meet her, and she tells us that the man was nowhere to be seen. She'd walked around the house before unlocking the door. She also thought it was weird if he was a salesperson, because he would have left a note saying, "Sorry we missed you." She ended up taking the rest of the day off to stay with us. Also, she could watch to see if the man would come back around. It's been 11 years since this encounter, and I still do not want to know what was in his briefcase. I was hiking deep in the woods by myself. I know it's dumb, but my buddy cancelled on me last moment, and I went anyway. I was with my dog off the popular trail on some small side trails when I noticed this weird guy following me about 300 to 400 yards back. I got a bad feeling from him straight away, so I went down a different side trail that no one would normally go down, as it's barely marked and doesn't go anywhere, then jogged for a couple of 100 yards. I stopped by a bend in the trail, then ducked behind a tree and took off my pack to get my hatchet out. Well, a few moments later, this same guy comes around the corner, looking around as if he's looking for me. We're about 8 miles from a road at this point, and the guy is wearing a stained jersey, a filthy hoodie, some ratty jeans, and dirty old tennis shoes, not dressed like a backpacker. I step out from behind a tree, hatchet casually at my side in one hand, dog leash in the other. My dog is usually really sweet and loves attention from people, but clearly understood that this guy was up to no good and started growling at him and getting into an aggressive stance. At this point, the guy notices me and we lock eyes. He looks really agitated and a bit crazy, and he starts moving towards me. I think he was so messed up on whatever drugs he was on, he hadn't noticed the dog or the hatchet yet. So I let out my dog's leash, moved the hatchet around a bit to draw his attention and say in a loud and commanding voice, "Hey man, you lost or something?" I guess his meth-soaked brain finally started working again, to a degree, because that's when he seemed to notice that there was a very angry dog standing at his feet, giving him a "I dare you" look. He muttered something about trying to find the parking lot, so I gestured with my hatchet and told him, "It's about 8 miles behind you." I could tell he was sizing us up for a few moments and trying to decide if I was worth it. After a really long pause, he just turns around and started slowly walking in the other direction. I found out from a ranger later that he got caught breaking into cars in the parking lot and had been threatening other hikers with a knife. On a different hike in the same state park, about a year later, I ran into some shady characters that offered me some free LSD. Shawnee National Forest is beautiful, but really strange. This happened a few years back, when I was 12 or 13. For reference, I'm from the Philippines. It was Sunday afternoon, probably 5 or 6, and I was at home with my dad. My mum had left to buy groceries about 30 minutes ago using our one car. As I was watching videos on YouTube, the doorbell suddenly rang. It rang quite a few times until I had had enough of it. That was when I knew I had to open it. Knowing that my dad was probably asleep in the other room, I reluctantly went downstairs to open the door. The thing is, I've dreaded opening the front door for people ever since my grandpa scolded me for opening the door for the mailman in his house. He lectured me about how dangerous it could be. I could have been taken or anything. With that thought, I climbed on the sofa, which was 3 feet away from the door, and pulled the curtains to see who was ringing. Note that the window I looked through was surrounded by a tall fence 4 to 5 feet away, so I felt perfectly safe, and I found it convenient later on when I talked to him. He had a dark cap on and a blue jumper. He looked pretty ordinary to me, but we weren't expecting anyone on a quiet Sunday. I asked him what his business was, and he replied that he was supposed to deliver pizza to this address. Excited and a bit confused, thinking that my dad secretly ordered pizza for us, I told him to wait so that I could get my dad. I climbed upstairs to my parents' room and saw my dad sleeping. I woke him up and told him if he ordered pizza, and he replied with a daze that he didn't. Disappointed, I went back down to break the news to the delivery driver, who probably got the wrong address. But when I went back, he was gone. Since I was pretty young back then, I didn't think much of it until now. Today, I'm almost certain, and even my mum agrees with me when I told her this story, that I was very close to being taken. Number 1. It was very quiet outside my bedroom window, as it was left open, but I didn't hear a motorcycle revving near the house, nor heard it when he left. He just left like that, though I specifically told him to wait. I didn't say that we didn't order pizza, and 3, there was no logo of the pizza place he was working for. The strange thing was that we only had 2 that were near us, and they had a distinctive red colour. I didn't see a motorcycle near him as well, which was extremely odd. My mum's theory was that the guy probably thought that I was home alone, and because our single car was gone, and my dad rarely got out the house as he was unemployed back then, what probably got him to leave was that I told him to wait for me to get my dad. If not for my grandpa's scolding, I would have answered the door, and this story would be unknown to everyone, as I would have been gone, and who knows what would have happened then. My cousin and I once found a makeshift wooden cross sticking out of the ground. We were creeped out, but wrote it off as just something some kids made and stuck in the ground for laughs. Eventually they began construction in the area, and no corpse was found that we knew of. So, yeah. Another time, we found half a deer, like the fawn lake ornament Christmas kind, stuck up in a tree, with the cut half painted red. I also have a little anecdote. So normally we wouldn't go into the houses they were building, because we figured it probably wasn't safe. We were kids though, and eventually curiosity got the better of us, and we went in one. It was in the early stages of construction, so basically just a house frame and foundation. We hung around there for a bit, and realized there was nothing fun about half-built houses, so we headed home. About 2 hours after we got home, which was really my grandma's house, we hear sirens, and we look out and see fire trucks heading into the woods. The fire department made sure no one went into the woods, and there was a small crowd of neighbors formed by the entrance. We asked around a bit, and one of the firemen told us that a house had burnt down. Turns out it was the house that we had been in not 3 hours ago. A couple of days later on the local news, there was a story about a serial arsonist who was protesting the construction in the local woods by burning down houses. About a year ago, I was finally ready to try online dating after ending a 5-year relationship. I had a few dates here and there and had great experiences overall. Most turned out to be close friendships that I still have today, so I was feeling pretty confident in my abilities to not get myself murdered. After all, I had lived in major cities alone, traversed third world countries solo. Surely I must have some modicum of wherewithal, right? Yeah. I matched with Michael. He looked legit on paper. College educated, career in finance, well-travelled, played guitar. He was witty and sweet, and kind. He was smooth. I told him how I had recently done one of those family DNA tests, and how I was finding genealogy really fascinating. He said he was a huge history buff, and was also really into tracing his family roots. We compared family trees. He was of mostly German lineage, and could in fact trace his father's side back hundreds of years. They were heavily involved in the military, and he mentioned how his great-grandfather was in a special German military unit. For a second, I entertained the thought, German great-grandfather, military. That'd be World War II, I think. Eh? Nah, that's crazy. Right? A long-time friend with German roots explained that asking a German person outright if they're a Nazi is extremely offensive. and I didn't want to die surrounded by hundreds of cats alone. So, if there's a chance this could be a real connection, I've got to see it through. But at the time, as a normal human being who doesn't buy tiki torches in bulk, I couldn't bear the thought of going out with a sympathizer. I thought maybe I could work some not-so-Aryan fun facts about me into our combos, and see how he reacted. So I mentioned how I had lineage from Jewish bloodlines in West Africa. Technically only 0.001 and 0.3 respectively, but hey, it still counts. I said South Africa is my favorite place, how I'm passionate about social justice, and that I come from a long line of civil rights activists. Surely at this point, if the guy had white power intentions, he'd get the hint that I was in no way, shape, or form the girl for him. But each time I looked for his evil, true colors to show, I found nothing. Okay. He asked me to dinner and I agreed. We talk on the phone a few times and I'm even more assured this guy is harmless. He says he wants to cook for me and make me a German dish of his grandmother's. Again, not a red flag because of the whole genealogy convos we had. And I hear the rhetoric in my head. Always go for a public place for a first date. But come on, what are the chances that this guy is some sort of psychopath? That only happens on Discovery ID. The night of it, I send my friends his name, address, Bumble profile, and off I went, with my favorite brightly colored South African beaded bangle for good measure, as if it were a talisman to ward off any alternate right energy. He lived in a nice area. That was reassuring, and he came out and greeted me with his cute dog. He seemed bigger than I imagined. For context, I'm 5'9" and 190 pounds. He had to have at least 4 to 5 inches and 60 pounds on me. His eyes had this almost silverish tinge to them. It reminded me of those bugs you find in your bathroom. I think they're called silverfish. His face looked bloated, sweaty, and splotchy. Was he sick? Maybe just nervous and hungover. Was I being judgy? His hair was longer and slicked back. It reminded me of a private school guy who wears sweaters tied around their shoulders. He gives me a normal feeling hug. Seems mostly nice and chill. We walk up an open-air staircase to the second level, and he opens the door to his place, and I'm pretty much clotheslined by the heavy, stale smell of cigarette smoke. This guy smokes in his apartment? Gross. He offers me a drink, and I notice a large collection of antique beer steins on top of his massive mahogany bar. I ask about his dog, this sweet German Shepherd mix with a strange name. It was inspired by a special group of German mercenary soldiers, he says. He then says, the Headless Horseman from Sleepy Hollow. Okay, that seems weird. I mean, if I told him I had a thing for Edgar Allan Poe when I was 12 and watched Murder Show 24/7, would he have thought the same thing about me? He offers to play some guitar while we wait on the schnitzel. We walk into his office/music room, and I notice a giant red, familiar-looking flag on the wall, but couldn't place it. Seems military-oriented. He gets a phone call saying a friend is dropping something off, and that he'll be right back. He mumbled something about how he tries to be generous and sometimes loans them money. Okay, maybe he's rich, maybe he just loves his friends. And 5 minutes go by, and he's back. Starts playing guitar and singing rather odd and slow, like a German olden song. I don't know if you're familiar with German songs of yore, but it seemed like an odd choice for a first date. I asked him where he learnt it, and he said it was an old war song that had been passed down through the men of his family. Stuck between a weird gut feeling and the patriarchy of telling me, don't be rude, don't act crazy, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. and pressed on. Then he lit a cigarette and sighed and gave me a tour of the place. He randomly mentions he suffers a lot from back pain. We get to his bedroom, and the main piece of decor is an actual Confederate flag, like right above his head. Like the kind you get at Walmart to put on your truck for a Charlottesville rally road trip. I think, hell no. Are you serious with this? I'm semi-aggressively calling him because I'm shocked and pissed off, but also smiling a bit because I'm afraid of making him angry and being murdered. I picture everyone at my funeral commenting on how stupid I was for not meeting this guy in public first. What? What are you mad about? I thought you knew I was a history buff. Yeah, but being a history buff is different from hanging a Confederate flag right above your bed. It's 2018, come on, man. He gives me this blank stare like I was speaking a different language. He mumbles some non-excuse about siding with the underdogs of history. I beg your pardon? Were the, I don't know, actual slaves not the underdogs? I just stared at him in shock. His phone rings and another friend is here to drop something off, and he walks out. I text my friend, all the red flags blaring, and ask if I'm completely off my rocker. I'm basically living in the movie Get Out and Run. No, he's the crazy one, get out now, is their response. I go grab my purse from his office room and take a photo of the flag and noticed a big old-timey amber glass medicine bottle that wasn't there before, about 5 inches tall, filled with white powder, and a trace of 2 small parallel lines of dust next to it. He must have been snorting when I wasn't in the room. Great. A racist and a drug addict. What else is this guy capable of? Is the Führer gonna freaking lock me in a cage and make his Caucasian concubine birth the next generation of Hitler Youth? I wasn't gonna wait around to find out. I bolt down the stairs and see a black car parked right in front with a light on inside. I assess my car is about 15 or so spots down to the right. I recognize Michael leaning over in the back seat, so he can't see me. I'm gonna make a run for it. I turn my body and head towards my car and inadvertently lock eyes with the driver for a split second. I hear him say, "Hey Michael, I think your girl is leaving." How did he know who I was? Michael looks up as I try to speed walk to safety. He chases after me and says, "Where are you going? Why are you leaving?" He seems actually really sad. "Look, Michael, you obviously have a lot going on tonight. I'm not feeling well. I'm gonna head home." He lays it in thick. "Come on, I dropped so much money at Whole Foods for this dinner. I've been so excited to meet you. Please stay. I'll promise you have a nice time. I'll be a total gentleman." "I don't know, I'm not feeling well. We'll hang out another time." "Are you serious? You're just gonna leave like that?" At this point, he's getting angry, and apparently on drugs. I could make a run for it, but I quickly realized there's no way I'd make it, and he'd get even more mad. My only choice was to keep him calm until I could figure out a safe exit, and that meant returning to the lion's den. "Okay," I said in my best, honey-dripping 1950s housewife voice. "You're so right. That was so rude of me. I'm sorry. Let's go eat. I'm sure it'll be great." We walk back up to his apartment and his friend drives away. I try to make eye contact, but he's looking away. I remember half-jokingly to myself, "I'm probably gonna die tonight." Awesome. The dog had eaten half the schnitzel. He's furious. If I hadn't tried to leave, this wouldn't have happened, he says. I apologize and try to calm him down. He then empties half a bottle of olive oil into a pan and starts sautéing onions. As he's moving the pan, it looks like he's falling asleep while standing up. He's nodding off, like what you see heroin addicts do on intervention. The white powder must have been crushed up painkillers. He's gotta be a dealer. This is why his friends keep coming by. My God, how did I let myself get into this situation? And now I have to worry about not burning to death, on top of not getting murdered. I tried slowly taking over the stove, but he wasn't having it. He kept lifting the pan of hot oil and sloshing it around while trying to keep his balance, all the while his eyes closed. I sat down behind the counter and just waited for the grease fire. My phone rings and I tell him I wanted to take the call outside, so not being rude. And my friend Jake asks if I'm okay. I tell him no and start to freak out and cry. All of a sudden, I hear a loud banging. Michael had opened the kitchen window and was actually cupping his ears to hear my conversation through the screen. He's so messed up, he has no idea I can actually see him. I snap back into character. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm having a really good time with Michael. He's great. I'm just having bad allergies. Let me call you back in a few. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm fine. I'll call you later. My lifeline was gone. I go back inside. He asks me to sit at one end of his massive, distinguished dining table. I realize there's so much more German memorabilia on the wall than I initially noticed. I think I actually spot a couple of teeny tiny swastikas on the antique beer steins, but at this point I'm questioning reality, so who knows. He brings me the plate of schnitzel and sits at the opposite end of the table, not next to me, not a couple of chairs down, but literally far enough away that we could play a decent game of beer pong. So there's probably 10 feet at least between us. I almost audibly laugh at how ridiculous and pretentious this must look. Who is this guy, Dracula? Who sits at the table like this when it's just two people chilling at home? Adolf and Eva must have used this same seating arrangement. Michael gets up and offers me a drink, and I ask for the wine I brought to be safe. He ignores me entirely, and instead gets out 2 giant glasses and pours chocolate milk. Oh, wonderful. Just what I wanted. Thank you. I nervously smile and drink it. I ask him about work, his hobbies, his family, like you would in any normal date, except I was literally talking to myself. I use the word literally very liberally here. He was on another planet, in and out of consciousness, but I needed him to think I was having a great time in the moments that he was conscious, so he wouldn't blow a gasket and stab me with an antique bayonet. Oh, this is such an amazing meal. What seasoning did you use here? He didn't say anything. Oh, yep, I can definitely taste it. You're such a great chef. I met with dead silence. Pan to him, head hanging over his plate, eyes closed, just sitting there. Thank you so much for this, Michael. This really was great, but I need to hit the road. At this point, I've been trapped in this psycho's apartment for 5 terrorizing hours. Surely to him, I've been a great date and deserve to leave. But instead, a switch went off. He's suddenly conscious and pissed. You're just gonna leave? You're not gonna help me clean the dishes? Oh, of course you're right. I'm so sorry. How rude of me. Here, let me help. I'll clean all the dishes as quickly as I can, while he just sits there, his head nodding intermittently. He slowly gets up and walks over to me at the sink. Oh, that's so nice. His tone is entirely different. You didn't have to do that. Yes I did. Do you have amnesia? Did you not just basically demand I do them? Jesus, get me out of here. I get my things and tell him what a wonderful time I had. Thank you for such a great dinner. He insists on walking me out. We're almost to my car, and I turn around and thank him again. He gives me a hug, and I can feel his hot, sticky body heat coming through the back of his shirt. Gross. We should do this again, he says, genuinely thinking tonight was a success. Absolutely, darling. It sounds great. I get in my car, lock my door, and relief washes over me, like the water from an ice bucket challenge. I'm shaking. I back out of the parking spot as he waves goodbye. I'm pretty sure silver tinge in his eyes is gleaming over my headlights. He grins, and I burn rubber, bawling, crying, and so thankful it's finally over. I found out later the familiar flag in his office was possibly affiliated with the Nazi Party, and the special military group his father was in was most likely the Nazi army. I reported him on Bumble and blocked him, and have never seen or heard from him again. So chocolate milk-loving, drug-dealing psycho-racist, let's not meet. Something scary happened to me in the woods when I was a kid. So, I'm letting you guys know what it is. When I was a young teen, there was a small forest fairly near our house. My neighbor and I would walk to it frequently and go build dens and play on the park near its edge. The land was clearly once part of an estate because it had an old 1900s looking swimming pool and bits of a stone path dotted amidst the undergrowth. We'd sometimes take kids there and play chase games or pretend to be tribespeople sprinting through the thick foliage. It was a fun place to explore, especially after we made a very interesting discovery of some rather risque magazines that all teen boys crave. They looked like they were from the 70s. Anyway, we'd been going there for about a year or so at weekends, when we finally decided to take a big pair of garden shears and start clearing the area for our biggest den yet. We chose part of the forest that had always been blocked off to us because it was mostly surrounded by a thick wall of bamboo, overgrown from the place's time as an estate. The forest was a paradise just for us. We'd never ever seen anyone there other than us or the people we brought. The magazines in our dens were always exactly as we left them, but all the same, we figured cutting a secret way into the bamboo-walled area, as that would give us the best protected den from strangers and barbarians and ninjas. It took us most of the day to cut our way in. When we made an arch to crawl through, we went in and found that we were in a clearing with only clovers growing in it, no taller plants at all, just a soft blanket of clovers. Dotted throughout were odd little knee-high statues of fairies sitting on stone mushrooms playing harps and other instruments. Every single one of them had its face smashed off. In the center of the cramped clearing was a giant concrete-looking block. We kicked over one of the fairy statues on the way over to it, probably to demonstrate that we weren't scared. It was a giant rough stone coffin. Some ivy-like plant covered most of it, but it clearly had a well-defined lid and a worn, unreadable inscription on the side. Adrenaline curious, we tried with all our might to lift the lid, but it must have weighed tons. The adrenaline wore off. We freaked out and hurriedly walked back through the play park, where we sat and discussed our find for a bit. We decided the clearing was too damn perfect to pass up, so the next day we returned with some old metal sheeting and plywood boards to build our shelter. It wasn't raining, but the day was heavily dark and overcast, so the woods were about as the darkest they could be during the day. We got back into the clearing, started building, and got pretty far with it. After a little while, my friend sort of yelped out, "Oh Christ." I turned to see him stood next to the coffin. It's giving me shivers just thinking about this. It was open. The lid was slid off to one side, just enough that a thin person could get through the gap. I ran over, stared into the gap, and saw nothing but pitch dark and whispered, "Run." The wind rose and it started raining, so there was noise everywhere right at that moment. I've never experienced anything like it. We ran through the woods faster than we'd ever practiced in our tribe games, and we never ever returned. Anyway, we went back earlier today, and everything was totally overgrown. As I'm seeing it now, I'm 6'5", and it's harder to move around. We did manage to find some of the landmarks, but every path I remember leading to or near the clover clearing was now gone. We spent a few hours getting lost in there trying to find ways around the back of it, but unfortunately, it looks like it's gone until some new kids cut their way in. Oh, and of course the magazines had long since dissolved away. No vampires, I'm afraid, but I'm going to tell you that it was creepy, particularly the way the clearing seemed inaccessible, and the fact that the cabin seems to have sprung out of nowhere. I placed my regular order of 2 cheese and anchovy pizzas. It took about 15 to 20 minutes for my pizza to get there. When finally my pizza arrived, the delivery guy was a strange-looking fellow, but friendly nonetheless. I took my pizza and we began to chat. Pizza guy said he had no more pizzas to deliver for the day, so it was cool for him to stay a little, and he would just tell his boss that there was traffic. Turned out he was training to become a professional swimmer. He didn't have any family, and he was from Scotland. I learned stuff about him, and he about me. It was a good time. We sat down and watched a game of soccer, and we were getting worked up. The score was 3-5 and his team was losing. I had a bet that if his team won, I would pay double for the pizza, but if my team won, I wouldn't have to pay anything. We sat there for what felt like hours. The time flew by. Next thing we knew, the score was now 35-5. My team hadn't scored any more points, but his team was on fire. We sat there, both with an intense look on our faces. My wife came in and asked why it looked like we were pooping, and who the other guy was. I told her that it was the pizza guy and how we had a bet. She was confused but left and decided to not ask any questions. Now the game had finished, and I had to pay the man double. I asked him how much it was going to be, and he said, "I'm going to need about $3.50. Now it was around this time that I got suspicious, and realized this pizza guy was actually 7 stories tall and a crustacean from the Paleozoic era. Damn it, Loch Ness Monster, I'm not giving you $3.50. I said that as he swam away into the distance. This was probably one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me, but by now I chuckle at it. I have been attending local conventions for about 8 years, and every year I cosplay as a character that covers my entire body. So heartless. GLADOS. Toothless. My own fursuit and others. I've never had an incident even when I wear my fursuit or cosplays on campus or in public. Everyone is generally pretty nice and welcoming to me, taking pictures and telling me I look cute, and how much they enjoy when the furries come to town. Furries bring in a lot of money to my city during the local furrycon, so when the incident happens, I didn't really know how to react. This year I decided to attend my first out-of-state con. This means that since I would be in a hotel, I would be at the con after midnight instead of going home. Now, since I've been performing in costume for several years, I was quite used to being able to maneuver by myself easily and would travel around the con by myself. Luckily, I had friends with me at the time because I wanted to film reactions to my costume. For the con, I was cosplaying as Foxy from Five Nights at Freddy's. The costume covers my entire body, so there is no way to tell my age, gender, body, or anything. I don't talk in costume either, I just stand still and blink my eyelight. Anyway, it was around 1 AM when my friends and I head down. My one other friend had been cosplaying as Freddy from the same game earlier, when her boyfriend was dressed as Mike, the security guard, also from the game. When we got off the elevator, I turned to Mike and said, "This is when things get weird." And oh, was I right. Not even 2 minutes later, some guy decided it would be funny to poke Foxy in the eye hard. This lodged the plastic eye right into mine. I paused for a sec to check and make sure the costume wasn't damaged. It was annoying. I quickly took my position around the corner of a hallway and waited for people to walk past. Mike and Freddy stood across the way and began filming. I was also filming from inside my costume. Shortly after I pressed play, a group of guys walked by me and one slaps my butt so hard it hurt for 5 minutes. I kind of shrugged that one off too, knowing that at 1 AM at a comp people were really drunk. But then things got extra weird. Some guy walked up to me and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Can I put my penis against you?" And before I could even process what he said, he was next to me and attempting to hump my leg. Because of my poor vision I couldn't quite see him, but I knew exactly what he was doing. I attempted to stay in character and just turned away from him. I was about to call over Mike to have him rescue me, but by the time he was already there, he too was attempting to stay in character and said to the creep, "Please step away from the electronics." The creep is confused at first but then starts laughing. Mike chuckles a bit to try and lighten the mood, but then the creep asks Mike if he could put his penis against him. By then Mike had enough and told him to piss off. The best part was that Mike was dressed as security, so the look on the creep's face when he came over was priceless. After all, these incidents happened in less than 5 minutes. I was about to call it quits, but after I kept going and ended up having a great night and got lots of good footage. It was a weird and creepy moment, but I kind of just laugh at it now and use the story as a warning to people to treat cosplayers with respect, and for cosplayers to always use the buddy system. I don't know what I would have done if Mike and Freddy weren't there. So, creepy guy, let's never meet again. "4 years ago, me and my grandfather were on a hunting trip in the Akala National Forest. On this trip, me and my grandfather happened upon a murder in progress. A man was attempting to murder a group of 5 hikers. The man was extremely strong enough to nearly rip off one of the hikers' jaws with just one punch and shatter several ribs of another and snap another's arm. That hiker survived the encounter, but he must have had combat training, as he had managed to not only hold his own, but absolutely kick the living hell out of the other 3 hikers. Me and my grandfather showed up in the middle of this and managed to stop the fight. Thank goodness that we were armed. So we held this guy at gunpoint until the authorities showed up. Turns out that all of the hikers were military vets who had done both tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. We were told that none of the men had managed to land a hit on this guy.